bushmen, good trackers. If in the if in 18th century France to be thinkers, good thinkers like Voltaire or something like that. So it's really important, that aspect of the myths, but that would be reductionist to assume they are just for helping the coming of age thing.
Well, yeah, I mean these types of stories you really can't reduce them just because every time you read them you find a deeper layer. But this is also sort of the oldest story, right? It's like, okay, Abraham, get the hell away from your family and go out into a world of chaos and tyranny and slavery and problems and go develop yourself and wrestle with those problems and see if you can defeat them and find a way forward. Jacob, stop lying so much, figure out how to be honest, deal with the karma of your previous lives, and then learn how to wrestle with the cosmos, wrestle with God, right? So it's all, get the hell out of here. This is not a place to stay. And, well, King George, leave the village, go into the mountains, find the dragon, slay the dragon, get the gold the dragon is hoarding, because there's something of value there that you know is there, but you can't be in the safe village to go and get that. It has to be, it's being guarded by the thing you fear most, and then come back and redistribute it. So the part you were talking about, the artist is getting in touch with, either through studying the myths or through being in touch with the muses themselves. They're getting in touch with the gold that's hidden in those dark, deep subconscious recesses. They're finding it either in a form that they can show it to us, or by comprehending it, which is what we're going to try to do in this class mostly. And then, like you were talking about, the artist is then, you were talking about the idea that an artist might update the myths and make them obviously impactful in our present day. The oldest written story that we have is the story of Marduk. It's the oldest one we have a written record of. And it's exactly that same story. It's go and face the thing that is most scary and cut it up into pieces, make sense out of it, make a world that you can inhabit out of the things that are most scary by defeating them, by wrestling with them, throwing a net over them like a conceptual net, cutting them into pieces. And if you don't do that, the whole world is at risk, right? So the movie that you sent me, which was really awesome, we'll just have to link it somehow in the video, it says the entire culture can't continue unless you do this. So the question is, okay, are we facing some sort of crisis? There's political upheaval, and there's AI technology shadows overshadowing what's happening to us, and there's all the trans agenda, and everybody's like, is everything falling apart? It's like, yes, always, in every generation. You don't get to a point where you find the answers and then that's fine and you just stay with those answers, because the cosmos is potential, which means there's a chaotic changing element. So when you figure it out, it changes on you. So the Egyptian story of the god who made farming and thriving possible for the entire kingdom, he gets old and ossified and blind, and his son has to go into the depths, into the darkest place, defeat the monster, rescue his dead father, and bring him back to life. That's the rejuvenating thing that you were talking about. The artist is updating. What was the word you used a second ago? I said impactful, but you meant
evocative.
You said evocative. Right. It's evoking. It's speaking and resonating with people more easily, because the artist is saying, okay, shit, we just died. We just died 80,000 generations, and every generation had to die and be reborn again, and we got to do that again now. So here's the updated version, and it's in my movie or my painting or my the video you shared on YouTube.
It also reminds me of that "Unfold Your Own Myth" poem by Rumi. It's so powerful. It kind of shows it kind of encapsulates so much of the hero's journey in so many myths, and it tells you really clearly, so you can understand, you are the hero and you're constantly being called into action. You need to pay attention. Unfold your own myth.
I'm going to look that up right now.
I have it right in front of me.
Can you read it? Can you read it to us?
Yeah, I can. So Who gets up early to discover the moment light begins? Who finds us here circling, bewildered like atoms? Who comes to a spring thirsty and sees the moon reflected in it? Who, like Jacob, blind with grief and age, smells the shirt of his lost son and can see again? Who lets a bucket down and brings up a flowing prophet? Or like Moses goes for fire and finds what burns inside the sunrise? Jesus slips into a house to escape enemies and opens a door to the other world. Solomon cuts open a fish and there's a golden ring. Omar storms in to kill the prophet and leaves with blessings. Chase a deer and end up everywhere. An oyster opens his mouth to swallow one drop. Now there's a pearl. A vagrant wanders empty ruins. Suddenly he's wealthy. But don't get satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth without complicated explanations so everyone will understand the passage. We have opened you. Start walking towards Shams, which is Rumi's mentor. Your legs will get heavy and tired. Then comes a moment of feeling the wings you've grown lifting.
Wow, that's amazing.
I felt
it's so
goosebumps
amazing
while reading this.
Yeah, this is so amazing. Rumi's able to like take a book and put it in 2 lines, and then he just does another 2 lines and then another 2 lines, just like that. God dang, that's good. All right.
Well, the Sufi tradition evolved a lot of playing with altered states of consciousness when they were dancing, whirling, smoking stuff, and dancing feverishly with music. Okay, so go ahead.
No, that's right. It reminded me of Quid ridis mutaro, nomine de te fabular narrator. Why are you laughing? Change but the names, and this story's about you. So you're talking about updating myth and discovering your myth, but the myths themselves are talking about going and doing that, right? So one of the benefits we get from studying myth is figuring out who we are, right? It's like you stare into the abyss until it stares back at you, but you stare into it long enough and you see the ancient forms of what came before you that made you possible, what's in your potential that you haven't yet actualized, right? And so it's like when we say they're being updated, and I know you know this, but when I was talking about them being updated, what we're not saying is, well, the old stories don't mean anything to us. No, it's that the meaning's all there, but if we haven't been read by them to be actualized into what we need to be, we don't have the capacity to bring that rejuvenated, invigorating life to being anymore, right? It's like we go there to figure out who we are, and then, well, that's what we mean by we get the gold. We get the gold, and then what you're talking about is you bring it back to the village and you distribute it. That's the process of, it's funny. You go to the dragon and you defeat him and you get the gold, and then you come back to the village, and you wonder why nobody's interested in the gold. you now have a new problem, which is, okay, how do I become the mouth for these years, or how do I at least let people think they stole it or something? Like, it doesn't have to be my mouth they get it from, but how do we get them the gold so that they can benefit from it? Boy, we could just do nothing but look at this poem.
You get gold and you end up in Thomas More's Utopia, and they think, oh, raw materials to make chamber pots.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's a good thing to not do. That's a good. So when we're talking about this, it's like, okay, wait a minute. You and I are talking pretty easily. Oh, this is it. It's a formula. You go and you get it. You get the gold. You bring it back. Really, the stories are doing nothing but telling us danger, danger, danger. A dragon can kill you, right? Like going into the abyss of your subconscious to figure out what you need to sort out and incorporate and get sorted out properly kills most of the people who maybe attempt to do it too late or who put off doing it. You know what I mean? Like the thing is actually dangerous. And then distorted myths are the other thing I was expressing in our private chat of saying like, until I'm humble enough to go and see what are the stories telling me just dreaming up something, it's not likely that that's going to actually be in tune with being in a way where being doesn't just slap me back down again, right? So I know you know this, but what we're not saying is, well, if you're an artist, just make things up and then the world changes to become the thing you want it to be. It's like, no, the world is trying to kill you. It's trying to kill your culture. It's trying to destroy everything of value. And the way you prove to the world, to the cosmos, to all of these things that are testing you, that you deserve to thrive and move forward and to leave a legacy and to be a part of shaping the world is by being in tune with it properly enough. And, all right, so this gets us to one of the Jungian keys that I really wanted to talk about. I had told the story last time about the fact that every couple of years I would feel this instinct to go back and try to read and understand the Greek myths and the Roman myths. And every time I'd just shake my head. I'd be like, this is freaking retarded. Like, I don't understand how anybody reads these, how anybody cares. What could these things possibly mean? I mean, this was decades of my life, really, just from the time I was a young teen. I would go back every 18 months or so to try. And I would just be like, what? I don't see, I didn't have the ears to hear. Jesus says, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. So we talk about the Jungian keys that unlock the meaning. So about 6 years ago, I thought to myself, all right, I had just finished Jordan Peterson's Bible lectures. And I said, okay, this is unfathomable meaning. I get it. I know exactly what the stories are saying now. I could read them and really get something out of them. This is amazing. All right, let me go try to figure out how he's doing this, right? How is he approaching the text and actually, being drowned in meaning, when before I would look at it and think that's too shallow a puddle to even splash in, right? So I did that, and I did it from a number of sources. Here's one of the keys, and we'll talk about a list of them, but it's applicable to what you were just saying. So one of the keys, it seems to me, is this: we get in a time machine and we go back 6,000 years, 10,000 years. We bring someone from there to our present age. Maybe we bring a tribal leader to our present age. Maybe we go back 100,000 years to cavemen, bear caves, and we bring the great, bold, noble leader who, all the chicks dig him because he leads the men on great hunts, and then the food is distributed and everybody thrives. The bears and the neighboring tribes, they die when they cross his path, so you can feel safe and secure living in his realm. And he's just a cool, good dude that's making it possible to move forward in a time that's really difficult. And we bring him to our present day, and we shove him through the electric sliding open doors of a climate-controlled grocery store without even telling him that places like this dot the entire planet with an unbroken lattice work of pavement that allows everybody to get to multiple different ones they can choose from, where food from all around the world is provided. And he stands there and he stares and he says, we did it. Everything I was fighting for, we were clawing our way up this hill with bloody fingernails to get to heaven, and we made it. Like, there's nothing else to do. And he's just slack-jawed for a moment. And you and I, we know that there's a lot to improve still. Right? We're aware of the fact that this is not heaven from our vantage point, but we forget that it actually is. We forget that this journey we've been progressing on, it's going pretty damn well, and we can imagine that, okay, the dragons are coming and it could all come to an end, but if we get in touch with the ancient wisdom, who knows where we'll be and how soon we'll be there. Okay, the next part of the story is this. We set him up in an apartment, and 2 weeks later, he takes over the world. I mean, he learns to use an iPad in an hour, and he takes over the world within 2 weeks. I mean, this guy, had such a difficult environment, not just to thrive in, but to make a thriving environment out of, that he had to be paying such intense, careful attention to what the universe, God, and the community were telling him was true about himself and his place in the world and everybody else's place in the world. We are benefiting from the work he did. And if we sit here thinking, oh, I've got Netflix and Domino's Pizza on delivery from my phone, so I've got it made, well, you don't understand that you know nothing compared to what the ancients knew. The people who wrote these stories, who told these stories, who gave us these paintings, they knew more about the world you live in than you know. Especially since the third part of the story is we all get in the time machine, we go back again, and you and I die within 2 hours. We don't have a chance. We have no chance. In fact, the things we do today that we rightly do to survive and thrive would get us stoned back then. Okay? If we were subtle and crafty and thinking hard and parsing words rather than making fast judgments, as I see the way you're looking at me and I see how this is, and you got to move quickly. If we were actually thinking things through, we'd be looked at like witches. And they'd rightly burn us at the stake because their whole society would die if our evilness spread. Like, you see what I'm saying? So we get to benefit from the work they did. Let's approach the stories as if, all right, well, let's lead to the second key then. Okay, so.
Just before you go.
Go ahead, please, yeah.
What you say has a bit of harkens to Darwin and how certain configurations of mind that we have now as a norm today are more or less adapted, and at least they are stagnated in our current context. Most of them are not flourishing. At least we don't think they are, but at least they are kind of going on and living at least a semblance of a life, and minds that are normal today would be completely out of their water in an ancient or prehistoric context, as you mentioned. So right. Yeah, of course.
Probably if we were steeped properly in these stories, if we got away from the distractions, like from that video you were talking about of our cell phones and Domino's and Netflix and all of this, if we actually understood that wisdom, we could go back and thrive really well, perhaps, right? Maybe if we worked out a lot first, and also, a bunch of other, it's not likely we'd thrive very well. The only reason I'm saying that, though, is that I don't mean to say that what was evil is good and what was good is evil. What I mean is that what was the necessary good at the time made so much good that now there's other goods that can come about. But that doesn't mean that those other goods aren't goods. They're, you're going to need them. When the Martians come or something, you're going to need some bloody warriors that don't think twice before they take action or whatever. Anyway, so yes. And then the other thing you said was the Darwinism thing. So this brings up, how is it that these people are coming up with these stories? Because everybody who lived back then wasn't Abraham, wasn't Moses, wasn't, Ovid or most people were, as we said last time, they were living in the culture that was made possible by the people who were telling these stories and orienting themselves around misunderstanding or partially understanding those stories. But the stories were so powerful that they took poop-throwing apes and made them pyramid builders and cathedral builders, right? So, okay, how are the people who are making the stories able to make the stories? Well, one of the things to consider is the fact that it's not really one person making the story. It's 10,000 years, maybe 100,000 years for some of the oldest stories, of a tribe trying to understand as individuals who they are in relationship to each other, to nature, and to the divine, whatever would be transcendent, and telling themselves stories to make sense out of that, and then passing those stories on. And when they pass them on, only the memorable parts of the stories are remembered. And so the stories get revised over many, many generations. And what's even worse than that is that the slightly different story of the neighboring tribe, their highest virtue is God X and our highest virtue is God Y. Let's just bloody it out and see who's right. Okay. So nature itself, it's not just that culture's trying to pass it on and there's some, memory aspect to it that's revising the story, but nature itself is trying to murder all of us with each other. And the stories that make you oriented in the world so that you can thrive even against those challenges from your neighbors suggest in potentia that you have a better story. Now, I know that we don't want to say there aren't accidents and tragedies and catastrophes of history, right? The Spanish burning the libraries of the South Americans and all of that. Maybe they were doing, all those books were just about child sacrifice, and maybe they lost. And maybe the reason they lost is that their stories weren't good enough. But it's also possible they had a lot of rich wisdom and we lost it for stupid reasons, right? So we're not saying that this system is perfect, but we're saying over millennia, it's producing something. It's still pushing it in a direction where it works, even if us being in charge of it, we wouldn't have made the choices to wipe out whole tribes, right? We're not endorsing that process to notice that it happened and that it helped to produce the stories.
Sure. But we should also mention that although there is this blooding out with people having different gods and different traditions, that's one of the possibilities of them confronting each other or interacting. But in history, it also happened quite a lot of co-opting, syncretism, and merging, and thus island peoples of the Achaean Sea with different gods, they merge into pantheons. The same happened in the Indian subcontinent.
Exactly. Okay, good. That brings up the second part, which is that revising and updating thing is also happening. I mean, you look at the stories of the Greeks, you look at the stories of the Romans, it's like the same stories, different name because it's a different language. Okay, well, you can adopt the deities from next door unless you become monotheistic and thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? So some tribes can and some tribes can't. But that you can also revise your story, right? You can say, oh boy, they seem to have something figured out there. Maybe our story should change just the tiniest little bit. And if it does, and then it's a horrible story, you all die. But on the rare occasion where it does and it makes the story better, you thrive more for that. So yeah, it isn't just bloodiness that's making the revision happen in a historical cosmic context. It's also these more positive elements too. I totally agree with that. But nature selecting away tribes of people whose stories aren't good enough to let them thrive in this bloody, horrible context is a Darwinian way of describing something that in more straightforward, easy language, we might just say the stories are revealed, right? It's revelation. The cosmos as a whole is telling us the story by picking away all the stories that don't work and maybe a few that did work and, a whole bunch of tragedies that we're not endorsing and catastrophes as well. But to say that it's not an individual person coming up with it like a super brilliant Shakespeare who just makes up the story, although I'm sure there were some super brilliant Shakespeares, we call them prophets, and they did more than others did. But but they're half mythological characters anyway, right? It's like, where did this story come from, Daddy? Oh, that's the mythical founder. He's the one that told us all this. It's like, well, that might be a way of saying it came down over 10,000 years before we really remember or something, right? So anyway, without going on a tangent, the point is simply that to say the cosmos as a whole is writing this story might be indistinguishable from saying it was revealed by something transcendent, right? The universe as a whole has certain questions you can't ask of it that Kant showed were meaningless questions when you ask them of the universe as a whole. Things that really troubled Hume about causality and beginning and things like that. You can't ask those of the universe as a whole. And what's interesting is of all of the antinomies that he pointed out, of all the questions that couldn't be asked of the universe as a whole, I don't think he did this on purpose, or I mean, he may have, but I don't know. You set those aside and you look at medieval philosophy of theology, right? The philosophical theology, they came up with a bunch of questions you can't ask about God that were irrational to ask about God. They turn out to be all the same questions. I don't think either side was trying to do that. It just emerges. And so you say to yourself, okay, I don't mean to say God is nothing but dead matter and randomness or something like that. What I mean to say is the cosmos is more super than people realize. The best way of describing what it's like is with these characterological personality stories. So, and it produced us with personalities. So the whole produces things that fit in well with it, and those things have personalities. So it's not that much of a stretch to just say, I'm going to think of nature the way most every super intelligent person in our species ever thought about nature, rather than the small minority of modern materialist scientismists who think that you're not allowed to say that. All right, I'm done with that speech there. But
I would also like to
was that
ask.
coherent? Yeah.
Yeah. I would also like to ask, since you mentioned the word characterological, if by characterological you mean specific typecast characters to symbolize an arrangement of character traits, or if you mean specific character traits that people must have in mind, or both. How do you address this word characterological?
Yeah, good. Christ said, I am the truth, which is a weird thing to say about truth, right? I have the truth. That's something Paul said. That's a way stupider thing to say about truth. It's that I own it, I think. But to say you are it is a pretty weird thing to say. The ancient Greeks who were trying to talk about love, lust, rage, they didn't say these things are. The language they used to describe those things was characterological. They said she and he are like this. This is what you need to make a relationship with this personality that exists in the world. When we said nature as a whole has selected away that which doesn't fit in well with it, so we're being radical Darwinians here. This isn't mysticism. And that what it produced that fit in best with it were characters that have personalities. Well, what we mean is that our characters, our lust, our rage, our subpersonalities, these things fit in well with the universe. Whatever nature is, she's out there and he's out there, and these other personalities seem to be out there in a way that has produced us as mirror images of it, created in its image. Okay, don't ask me how Moses figured out that we were created in the image of God. Don't ask me how anybody figured that out when they were mythopoetics, because they're just genius artists, poets, and prophets. But that seems to be the same thing to me. Like, I don't think there's actually a meaningful difference between saying whatever nature is, it makes reliable patterns of ways of being. So to further answer the question of what is characterological, the story of Cain and Abel, it's not a morality tale. It doesn't say do X and don't do Y. Okay? It doesn't say if you do X, bad thing will happen to you. If you do Y, good thing will happen to you. It doesn't say that. It says, here's a guy. Here's what he's like. Here's what it's like to be him. Here's what happens when he interacts with the world, what the world does to him and what he does in the world. Okay? It's not even saying be like him. It's saying, does any of that resonate with you? Right? That's all it's saying. It's saying, perhaps you're more like that than you realize. Maybe this will help you wake up to what you're like. Hey, maybe the hero resonates with you a bit. Maybe that means that you have the potential to be more like that. Why don't you take encouragement from that and learn some lessons from the story to not fall into the same pits that he fell into along the way? Oh, I like watching the gangster movie. What's that famous one? Say hello to my little friend. What's that guy?
Oh, okay. I don't remember, but he was
Whatever.
referenced in Home Alone. But
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't remember
Scarface,
the. Yeah,
Scarface.
Scarface.
Okay, so maybe I watch Scarface and I think, yeah, I'd like to be like that. And I think, well, there's something in me that resonates with that. Well, that's what it's telling me. It's not telling me be like that or don't be like that. It's saying, hey, we already know you. If you're like this, maybe in part, maybe you don't want to be so like this. It comes to a bad end. Or maybe you watch it and you say, yeah, I do want to be like that. Everybody dies and I want that end. That sounds like a great end. It's not telling you how to be, it's telling you who you are, and it's telling you ways of being in the world. So look at the rest of Genesis. So Cain and Abel, we're struggling like that caveman we were talking about before. We're trying to survive in a world that's very harsh. And we've come on the idea that if we sacrifice, that sort of works sometimes. We're not exactly sure why, but it seems like God is watching and he likes when we sacrifice. So we start practicing sacrificing. And Cain is trying to succeed and he's sacrificing, right? He's not saying, the heck with sacrifice. I'm going to go be the grasshopper in the ant story and I'm going to do whatever I want. He's actually sacrificing and God's not smiling on his sacrifice. The universe is looking at him and saying, no, not you. Not good enough. I don't like it. Okay, now he's got an option. Well, the option is told to him by God. He says, look, if you do well, you'll have what you need, right? It'll work. Let me look up the line because I think I'm misremembering it. God said to Cain, if you do well, will you not? See. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Okay, it doesn't say if you do what is right, will you not thrive? It doesn't say if you do what is right, will you not have all the things you're hoping to have? But it says, look, if you do what's right, you got a place here. But you have another option. Sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is for you. Okay, this is the same language used a chapter ago with Adam and Eve. This is a sexual metaphor. He's saying it's prowling around and it wants to fuck with you and create something new and monstrous in the world. And you can choose to do that with sin if you want to. You can bring about monsters that never existed before. You can become the first murderer. You can kill the thing you wish you were. You can do things so badly that there's no coming back from it as far as you're concerned, the natural consequences of it, right? So he says, look, if you do what's right, you've got a place here and nobody's promising you any more than that. You can want more than that and be bitter that you're not getting more than that. And you can choose to do something that is it's not going to end well. And of course, we know what Cain does. Cain, by the way, kills his brother, destroys his own ideal, wanders the world, has a mark on him, which is sort of a mark of protection, interestingly enough, but you can tell it's him when you see him. And then he builds the first city that's mentioned in the Bible. Remus and Romulus build Rome, fratricidal brothers. All the mythological stories are telling us that the reason politics is invented is to deal with the worst part of humanity. It's invented in opposition. The law and the police are invented in opposition to humanity as such. Well, there's a story we're going to read in Ovid, which says, okay, since that's what it is, and it's a character, it's a personality, you need to know what this thing is like because it has goals and desires. There are things it does well, things it doesn't do well, things it relates to well, things it doesn't. There's a yin-yang in all these characters. But this political thing, since it is born in opposition to the parts of humanity that we need to oppose, all totalitarian solutions end in the deaths of millions of people. That's in this book. And not only is that in this book, but the line, if you forget this lesson, new fires will come into the world. That was written a long time ago. Through the Middle Ages, there were legal arguments and little battles and tiny wars and a balance of power. But in the last century, something new happened. On the left and the right, we forgot this lesson. We thought, I've got a total solution. I've got a solution for everything, and it's in politics. We then had to invent the term nuclear fire. The word never had to exist before, but new fires came into the world, as well as Holocaust and genocide. All three of those words are new words that had to be invented or had to have their meanings changed precisely because we forgot that lesson. How they knew that, I don't know. I don't know how that's so obviously in here. When you take the Jungian keys and you unlock the meaning, how they knew specifically that was the case, I can't answer that question. But that is in here. And you know what I mean? Like, so when you use the keys, a sledgehammer hits you in the face of how much meaning there is and how much it applies to our lives and to everything. So wait, I got off track. You were asking about characterological. So okay, so we've got Cain and Abel, and said this is a way of being. Here's what happens when you're like this. Maybe, probably the truth is there's a little Cain in me and there's a little Abel in me, and maybe the Cain in me wants to kill the Abel in me, right? And maybe the Cain in me wants to kill actual Abels or things that I think are doing better than they ought to do. I mean, look at all of the attitude on Twitter and the internet. Everybody just can't wait to throw stones at anybody who's trying to do anything and seeming like they're succeeding. It's like, okay, why? Because you're not. Because you're not, and you don't care if it's good or bad. You just care that you get to call everything bad so that you can try to kill what you wish you were. You think there's any coming back from that? There might not be, right? So you read the story, and maybe if you hear it properly, it terrifies you, and you have a chance to say, well, the story always told me I had two paths to take, right? I could just do what's right and be accepted. Or you might say to yourself, fuck that. I choose the other path. Absolutely, you're free to do that. I mean, the story isn't telling you what to do. It's saying, look, if you want to shoot up a school, if you want to kill the most innocent things around you and say, fuck being, I hate it, and shake your fist at everything, that's how that ends. You're not going to like it at the end, but those are your choices. And it's reading the war inside yourself and telling you these are your options. They were Cain's options. Well, we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And you know what? They all had the same thing to struggle with. They were all trying to find a way to advance the kingdom. They were trying to find a way to wrestle with God properly to move the kingdom forward. They were trying to orient themselves in the world properly so that they could get a blessing, that they could thrive. Well, these are characters, and they're not the same character. I feel like the story of Jacob really resonates with me, unfortunately. Jacob is an arrogant son of a bitch. He listens way too much to his mother. He's very deceptive. By the way, there's no criticism for his mother in this story, which we'll get to in a minute. But he thinks he's the one and he's destined to be the one. And so all the lies against his father and his brother and all the treachery, that's all justifiable because it's supposed to be this way. He has to get cast out, flee like a coward for his life, spend 14 years getting fucked over by other people being dishonest with him till he's had enough karma, and then get a revelation, and then wrestle with God, right? So the story of, okay, I'm going to try to dislocate God's leg to get a blessing, that sounds like faith to me. Like, I get that. Put that aside. Joseph, way better dude. Way better dude. Okay, I've been in, I've been in church groups. I used to go to a different church every Sunday. I really like religious people. So I've been at church gatherings where they're talking about Bible stories, and you bring up Joseph, or they bring up Joseph. I mean to say, they tell the story. Oh, he gets falsely accused. He gets thrown in prison. Oh, he'd been thrown in a well. This happens, that happens. All this stuff happens to him. He must have been pretty discouraged. He must have been pretty depressed. That's the lesson I'm going to take from the story. That's not in the story, buddy. You know what is in the story? Abraham pimping out his wife because he's afraid he'll be murdered for her. Okay, the story isn't brushing over the flaws of the people we're talking about. But it never says that Joseph was real sad for a while, but then he thought to himself, I'm going to push forward and see what happens. Joseph is a different character. And the reason why people can't recognize it, I think, is because they feel they don't have it or they've never seen it before. But I've known a couple Joseph people in my life. It's a way of being in the world. And I swear to you, it's like a miracle. You meet a person like this, no matter what happens to them, whether they're made king of Egypt or thrown into prison or left for dead in a well, they look around and they think, how could I make this place better? And that's just what they do. And I swear I've met people like this. I don't know you very well. You may be like this. You know what I mean? Like, I know that there are people like this, and this is an amazing way to be in the world, but it's a different way than Jacob is. The point of that is that that's what I mean by characterological. These are stories about ways of being in the world. And with all the flaws that Abraham had, with all the flaws that Jacob had, Joseph, we may say there are flaws there. Whatever. With all the flaws that any of these people had, the story is still telling us, but they did it. They found a way to get there and advance the kingdom and be a part of having multiple generations, of shaping the future of the world, of saying yes to being and making the world a better place for others and all of that. But is that enough? That's what I mean by characterological. So we're going to meet Apollo. We're not going to say, hey, here's a metaphor for a thought. I could give you the propositional thought, but I'll just pretend it's a guy and I'll hide the propositional thoughts. It's not like that. You can extract a billion. Look, read King Lear and tell me you can reduce that to a page of propositions. You can't even fill a library of all the peer-reviewed journal articles of literary people and other disciplines, professors, who reference it and try to say the meaning they got out of it. How much of Freud's, just a sliver of what I'm talking about, how much of Freud's contribution to psychology was understanding one play? Okay? We're going to meet somebody. Right? You have a friend. You tell me, hey, this is a great guy. I want you to meet him. Okay? You know him. I know of him, but I don't know him. Right? Christ says that God is going to harshly say, depart from me, I never knew you, if we never knew him. Okay? So when he says, I am the truth, what he says is build a relationship with me. I'm not being Christian right now, just like I'm not being pagan. I'm going to talk in the same way about all these different things. So I'm not necessarily being Christian, I should say, or maybe I'm being all of them or whatever. But the point is, the way the stories talk to us is characterological. That was the question. Flush that, what I mean out by that out. And what I mean is, the deepest language we may have for describing the actual nature of being is the language of narrative. It seems like this is the deepest. And narrative is the language because it's characterological. It's not saying love is like this. It's saying, hey, here's this guy Cupid. He makes these kinds of jokes. He does well with these people. He doesn't do well with those people. Here's how he brings Apollo and Zeus and Hercules and Pluto. He brings all the other deities down. He defeats every one of them in a story because he's depicted with wings. He's on a higher level. That's love. He's the son of Venus. She's lust. She doesn't have wings, but she's higher than you and I, right? And she has a historical will. And you could get to know her, and you might need to make some sacrifices, some propitiations, navigate some things, because she's in the world. She's someone you have to deal with. And if you're not aware of that, that's not going to stop her from possessing you. And when she does, if you're not in line with understanding any of that, the odds that it's not going to be very good for you when she possesses you are going to be much higher. Same with rage, right? So get to know Zeus, get to know Mars, get to know Venus, get to know Christ, get to know Joseph, and see what resonates within you. The reason why we say it must be characterological is because that is, again, how many propositions are you going to pull out of King Lear? You fill up a library and you're still not going to fully get there. This is the deepest language. If it's the deepest language, it's narrative. Why is it narrative? Because the deepest way of speaking about what being is like is characterological. How does that work?
Yeah, if I interpret it correctly, it's like it's a different language, but it uses signifiers and signifieds all the same. It's just that the connection between the signifier and the signified is way more challenging to establish, because we need to delve into the story to see if the character resonates with us. Probably if we pay attention, probably it does, because we are all, although we are all inside the cosmos is within us, all of us.
That's right.
We are all, by being, just by being, we are cosmos, doing its thing. um, and Well, sometimes words and an entire prose, or in an entire text, and or an entire bunch of statements, won't do justice to a signified, and someone needs to create a myth in which this signified is represented by a signifier, a character, and maybe even
Okay.
some of the traits of the character are kind of like signifiers as well.
Okay. It's so hard for us to do what we're going to be doing in this class. We're going to be taking this radical mythopoetic approach. It's like you read a novel, you get into the world of it. We're going to try to get into the world of a mythopoetic way of thinking. And today, let's talk about that essay on how to think mythopoetically. We'll do that later. But it's so hard. It's so hard for us because we've been so trained to think. Look, I think what you're thinking is correct. I think the words we're using are less radical than what we're actually going to try to be doing, or what I'm going to invite us to try to do. So let me put it this way. A sign signifies, right? It points at something. A symbol has within it the nature of the thing it's telling you about. Okay? So I don't think you were thinking this, but when we say signify, right, we're saying, okay, if it was only signifying, then we could take the character of Apollo, we could figure out the 1-to-1 ratio to what it means. We could take all his traits and draw a straight line and connect all the dots. We could say, okay, this story can be translated into this one page that says, here's all the lessons you need to learn about life. The reason why you can't do that with the story, and why you'd fill libraries, and why every time you reread the same story, you get a deeper level of meaning to it, which we're going to experience when we read this. The reason why that's the case is that I think this language is actually the deepest language. We don't need to translate it. What we need to do is try to, all of us, myself included, is extract from our minds the habit we've been trained in. You know, even young people in school, they're told like, ooh, figure out. I remember in a music class, they played a classical piece for us and they were like, you know, tell me what it means. And I was thinking in this like signifying kind of way, like, okay, it's pointing at this or that or whatever. And I was trying to like decode it. And I remember one of my teachers was always talking in that way of like, get the hidden meaning. And then that shows how clever you are or whatever. It's like, no, wait a minute. The hidden meaning or the meaning that's in there is unfathomable. You can't get it, right? It's inarticulatable. If it was articulatable, you wouldn't need the statue of David anymore. You wouldn't need the statue of Venus. People wouldn't fly around the world to go stand in front of it with their jaw hanging open for 3 hours, staring at it, saying something meaningful is happening to me here, but I can't put it into words. Or if you're very intelligent or studied or whatever, philosophical or more genius than I am, you can put it into an endless amount of words, right? You can never have enough words to fully encapsulate it because the thing, that's the truth. What's radical about what I'm saying is I'm asking us to imagine that truth is a personality, that lust is a personality, that rage is a personality, that imperial, political, sophisticated culture is Apollo. He is in the world, and all of what we do is some approximation of the absolute of what he is. That he exists in relationship to Zeus, who's on the throne, and to Venus, and to these other characters. But that we'll talk for hours about what exactly he represents, because we'll never get it down and pinpoint it, which is a fun thing to do. So again, I think that's probably what you were thinking, but I made a big deal about signifying so that I could make that distinction, because let's get into this essay. One of the first points he makes is this idea that the mythopoetics, their way of thinking was not to personify the world, because they didn't have a distinction between persons and the rest of the world, right? Everything just was one thing. And so they weren't personifying, they weren't coding it they were relating to it, and it was being revealed to them in that context. So why don't I stop talking about it poorly and actually just pull it up, and we'll look at what he says there.
Please do, go ahead.
Let's see, Ovid. Okay, there's a lot I disagree with him in this essay, but there's some really great stuff. So why don't I also pull up my notes on this? Why don't we close out of that?
Just while you're pulling it up, I would add that when we talk about communication, there's the etymology of the word, which means to make something common. So
I'm sorry. Say it again.
So if I have an idea and I want to transmit that idea to another person, say you, I would try to explain that idea in a way that you could apply it in the real world. For example, it could be an idea that is related to something technical and something applicable to the real world. And if I am successful, you manage to do the same thing, the same action, the same habit in the real world. So that could count as making something common. But our forms of communication don't do just that. They also create impact. And sometimes the source of speech, for instance, like Pericles giving his funeral oratory speech, he said some really inspiring things about the values of Athenian democracy and how citizens participate in it, and how they are giving their lives for something of great value. Maybe the audience was even more awed and overwhelmed than Pericles himself, because they weren't expecting it. And so in this kind of source speech or something being emitted, and then the receivers, probably the receivers will be impacted in some way that they are made even different. They feel different meaning. They feel different meanings and different emotions that not even the source felt.
100%. You can't. Okay, exactly. That's a consequence of what we've been saying. It has to be that way. Whoever is telling the story is trying, if they're inspired by the muses, if they're inspired by the Holy Spirit, if they're inspired by something transcendent, and it's actually this kind of mythopoetic revelation, and then it passes the test of millennia and all of that, and it goes through its revisions. If it's that kind of a story, nobody can fully understand it. This is what Jung meant by archetypal. It's at the bottom. You can't pry it up and you can't fully comprehend it. It's, how many ways. Okay, it would be like this. Let's say I know you. Let's say we grew up together and we were friends. Do I know what you're like when you're pushed out of a plane with a parachute? No, unless I did that with you. Do I know what you're like when you're pushed out of a plane without a parachute? No. Do I know what you're like when you're scuba diving? Do I know what you're like on Mars? It's like there's an infinite number of ways that you could be that I've never interacted with. Right? So I could never fully know you. And it's exactly the same. That's another way in which characterological is what we're talking about. I can never fully, it's like saying, oh, I've been married and I have a great marriage for 40 years, so I know my wife. Really, she's not going to surprise you. Why don't you tell her that she can't surprise you and see what happens next week? And then you're wondering what the hell's going on. Like, we as individuals are too complicated for that. So this brings up another. It's like, okay, Michelangelo knocks away all the pieces of stone that are not David, and he's left us with David. What does it mean to Michelangelo? Who cares? Who cares? There's a lot of art teachers who are like, well, what did the artist really try to say? It's not his art anymore. What it means to me and what it means to everybody else as a whole is why it's valuable. Now, it's an interesting question, but it's this interesting compared to how interesting the statue is, right? It's slightly more interesting than asking the question, what does an interesting genius think about this piece of art? It's slightly more interesting than that, which makes it slightly more interesting still than just what does any random person think about this art? Getting to know it, relating to whatever archetypal, we'll use the word archetypal because the Mythopoetics might have said divine or transcendent form that's at the base of reality. But this is what Jung is talking about when he says archetypal. Whatever piece of archetypal reality it is giving us the ability to relate to, again, not as a sign pointing to the thing, but as being partly like the thing, having the nature of that thing in it to some degree so that we can directly relate to it. Whatever that is, it's as unfathomable as any other person. I mean, you can't fully ever think you understand it. So, all right. Wait, you're saying... Yeah, okay, good. So the question, what was the artist trying to say, is slightly interesting sometimes. Compared to what the art is, that's nothing. That's a sliver of what could be interesting there. Okay, so we talked about three realms, right? You could have your lab coat on, and you could be in your lab, and you could have a name tag that job title says scientist. And then for those 8 hours, while you're doing your work, for about an hour and a half, if you're really genius, you can think in a scientific way, at most. Okay, the rest of the time you're in the lab, you're not. And the rest of the time you're not in the lab, you're certainly not. Okay, you're driving home from the lab and you're thinking, I'm hungry, this traffic's a pain in the ass. I wonder if my meal with my wife tonight is going to be good. Like, I hope it's going to be good. There's this thing I want to talk about, whatever. You're thinking in characterological terms. You're not thinking in scientific terms. You might be thinking in rational terms or strategic terms or philosophical ethics-based terms where you've got propositions and stuff. You might be doing that, but mostly you're living in a mythopoetic world where you're feeling and dreaming and fearing and hating and being frustrated. I'm not to say that the mythopoetic is emotional, but to say that emotions are not rational, so they're only comprehensible in the mythopoetic, but it's more than that. But in any case, that's the way you're thinking most of the time. Most of the time, the Earth is not round to you. The Earth is a flat disk, and you and I walk around on it, and we've got north, south, east, and west, or really forward, backward, left, and right, and maybe the bisections of those in our mind as ways we can navigate. We're basically two-dimensional creatures in that way. If we're writing the algorithm for communication satellite, or we're flying a plane, the Earth is kind of round to us a little bit while we're doing that. Okay, here's a book. We should have thought of this before. We'll probably read this book. It's a very short book. It's called The Discarded Image. It was made out of a series of lectures that C.S. Lewis gave on the way medieval people thought about the cosmos. And it's so genius because the first thing he points out is everybody knew the Earth was round, you morons. Everybody knew the Earth was round. If you ask them, is the Earth a sphere? They'd be like, yeah, of course, who cares? But their cosmology was that it's a disk with a dome and then 7 other layers of dome on top of it. There's humanity, and then there's like this funnel underneath it down to hell, and that was their cosmology. But if you ask them, is the shape of the Earth, more like this or more like this or more like a ball, they would say a ball. Okay? So his first point is cosmology is not about which mathematical formula most conveniently describes the shape. Okay. What it's about is who are you and where are you and in relationship to what are you? Okay. In that story, the idea of a disc with some domes and a funnel, that's not such a stupid idea anymore. And then because he's so brilliant, I swear to God, in this lecture, he's just effortlessly quoting lines of poetry that no one has ever read except for him. And they're all from medieval time periods, and they all make his point. So look, in this poem, the guy descends into hell, and then he leaves out the other side and looks backward, and the devil's upside down. He clearly understood he was coming out the other side of a spherical earth, and everybody who read it understood it, right? So he's just quoting all of this poetry just effortlessly. But he's trying to help us understand their mythopoetic cosmology. And they had it in a time where they also had that scientific language. As you pointed out last time, if anybody's coming here, go to the first video. As you pointed out about the 3 ways that the tribal bushman hunter can think. Of course, he has all 3 available to him. He's just not so idiotic as we are to think that the one most narrowest, hardest to apply to things, least helpful should be the only one he ever pretends he talks about, even though he can barely use it, right? We're doing that because we're scientismists and because our culture is telling us to pretend to worship this God that actually isn't serving us and isn't that powerful. All right. Let me shut up since I'm going off on a bit of a rant here. Reflections before we move on.
I would just add that we need to be tool-minded, like a craftsman reaches for the appropriate tool when for the task at hand, and not obsessive, not like obsessed with a single tool, in how we relate to metaphysical constructs. In how you mentioned that people, when they need to do satellite things, they better embrace a metaphysical construct of the Earth.
You better.
Yeah, that conceptualize the Earth as round and involves the orbital dynamics, mechanics calculations. But when they are out hunting or fishing or camping in the woods or whatnot, or just walking around in town, they can just conceptualize the city as flat, and it will work.
Well, and they do whether they admit they do or not, right? So you go up and you shake them, and you say, "What's the shape of the Earth?" And they say round. I'm supposed to say round, right? They don't say I'm supposed to say it, but that's the only reason they're saying it. But that's not how they're thinking about it, right? When they think of the shape of the Earth, they think of the question round. I was taught it was round, and I know that that's the thing you're supposed to say. But they don't look around and why would you? You'd be an idiot if you were thinking like, well, if I jumped fast enough in that direction, I could spin around in an orbit. It's like, no, you've got north, south, east, and west, and those are the directions you can walk. And, you know, in any case, that's how you're thinking about it. Okay. And let's underline what you're saying here, not to get obsessive and not to use the wrong tool. Absolutely 100%. I started
just let me
around like that when you said it.
Just let me quote Miyamoto Musashi. He says this: "You should not have a favorite weapon. To become over familiar with one weapon is as much a fault as not knowing it sufficiently well."
That's pretty good. So, okay, that's exactly correct. So that brings up a good cautionary note of how to not fall into chaos by going into this realm, right? We're going to adopt the mythopoetic perspective to understand these stories. If somebody comes to you and says, look, I figured out what the story means, and the story is telling me that my political solution will solve everything and we should destroy all the non-white races or something like that. Nazis did that with mythopoetry. They did it with myths. They said the myths are telling us we are superior and that's what we should do. Well, we're going to find out the myths definitely don't say that. The myths definitely say a political solution that's totalitarian will bring about nuclear fire, as we mentioned earlier. So they were bad readers, the Nazis, in my perspective. The Nazis also said that Darwinism and science proves that you've got a political agenda. You look at everything through that lens, and then suddenly everything's telling you you're right. It doesn't mean you're a good scientist. It doesn't mean you're a good studier of scripture. It just means you're annexing all those things to say they're a part of your political ideology because you're possessed with it. Well, guess what? The stories tell you you're going to come to a bad end because of that, and we're going to read those stories. And Darwinism is, of course, about adaptability and not domination. So they're bad scientists and they're bad myth readers. But this brings up a good point. What happens if we read the story and we think, I think I've extracted correctly an ethical proposition from this story? What should we do? What we should not do is say that proposition is true. I completely comprehend it. I understand it accurately. I understand it came from this deep source of wisdom, and I pulled it out accurately without distorting it. Therefore, I'm not taking any questions today. No. As soon as you have a proposition, you're now in the realm of the philosophers. You're in the realm of right thinking. Now that has to be subject to ethical debate. Okay, so it's wrong to say, I read the scriptures and they told me the earth is 6,000 years old. Now I'm going to disregard all of your science because I've extracted the scientific truth out of it. Maybe the earth is 6,000 years old. Maybe you've accurately extracted that from the text. Maybe that's what the text was trying to say, and you haven't been an idiot who doesn't know how to read it properly and get the real meaning out of it. Maybe. But now that you have a proposition, descriptive and testable by empiricism, those scientists are the final judge. Go take it over there. Okay, so that gives us, so this is really important what you bring up here, because I have a really good friend I've been debating this with for at least 6 years. Yeah, probably since I started doing that thing. And he's fantastic. He's going to be teaching another class on this website soon, and we're working on another one together. But he is really hesitant to get into any of this mythopoetic talk. And it's been a wonderful discussion we've been having for 6 years. It's just fantastic. Maybe we'll bring him in here sometime and we'll talk about it. But he loves discussing it from the philosophical perspective, and he's very hesitant. And that's partly why he's hesitant, because he understands that you can be a Nazi, think you've got the truth, and then say, this is the deepest truth possible. I get to beat everybody over the head with it. No, there's political philosophy. There's ethics. If you've got propositions, those are the judges. You have to debate it, and it has to win out there. Oh, and by the way, the mythopoetry, you read it badly, and it says that you're going to be tested by history and you're going to lose because of that interpretation. So I don't think you even interpreted that properly. So we can criticize the way people are interpreting it, and we'll be able to do that better as we talk more about these Jungian keys, and that'll help us to criticize our own reading as well as unlock the meaning for us. But beyond that, there's a further safety net. As soon as you think you've taken a proposition out of King Lear and it's giving you an ethical thing, try to live it out and see how well that works. That's a mythopoetic way of testing it. But also, if it's a proposition, go to the ethicists and let's debate it. All right? If it's a proposition and it loses, it doesn't mean the story was wrong. It means you didn't sophisticate the proposition, or you didn't accurately identify it, or you didn't construct it properly, or it wasn't in there in the first place, right? So that's great. We still have all the benefits of philosophy. We still have all the benefits of science. And we, like you said, use the proper tool in the proper place. Okay? But that gives us a major safeguard, because we're not going to go and read this and say, I know what it means, and it means this. And I'm going to be a Bible thumper or a Metamorphoses thumper or anything thumper. And I'm going to tell you that you all have to believe it too, because that's in the story somewhere. I don't know where. You know, it seems like that's missing the point and not reading it properly. In fact, it's not reading it properly in the same way the Nazis aren't reading it properly, right? It's taking your need to identify as someone who owns something important, owns the truth, and so you just annex it and beat it to death and rip off the cover and say, look, this book is on my side too. Well, Go to the philosophers if you've got a proposition. Go to the scientists if you think you understand something empirical. And they've got lots of work to do too. And you might be right, but that's where we figure those things out. So that was I'm glad you brought that up, because what you said is correct there.
And you just destroyed the Nazis in a way that's such an elegance in destroying the Nazis vertically from myth to passing through philosophy to science.
Well, I don't know if I did. I said that the stories will, and they will do a much better job than whatever degree I may have offered some criticism in those remarks. But yeah, to test something mythopoetically is to try to live it out and see how well you do. Okay, so you can do it in your own personal life, but history is the judge. We are historically destined to rule the world and to dominate everybody else. Did that work out for you? Well, then you were wrong, right? It's like, I should marry this woman. We're going to have a great life together. She's been cucking you since the wedding night, and she had 3 abortions. She doesn't want your kids. It's like, holy shit. Okay, well, it didn't work, right? Like, that's testing things mythopoetically. And here's the thing. I don't mean to be a downer. I think I should marry this woman, and I do, and it works out great. That's just also testing it mythopoetically, right? But the mythopoetic test is living it out and seeing what happens. Now, of course, it's not science, right? There's all sorts of catastrophes. It's not like you can say, oh, I'm dying of cancer, so I must not have been living properly, right? That's not what we're saying. Although, I say that while I'm smoking a whole pack of cigarettes while we're talking. So there may be a germ of truth to that too, perhaps. Or maybe not.
Maybe you unwittingly have some kind of myth that informs you that smoking is in your interpretation of that myth. Smoking is something that is a good choice.
Yeah, well, or I may have a subconscious desire to protest being and bring myself to an end, and that needs to be dealt with, or the dragon will kill me. I mean, right? That's the mythopoetic realm of figuring these things out. Right now, it's still a part of my character. So characterologically, it's necessary. This thing doesn't run on oxygen alone.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Maybe not this, but this. Yeah,
one of the major things that that I found in James Clear's Atomic Habits is, and also this book about stopping smoking, the easy way to stop smoking or something like that. The emphasis was not in making people that have the habit of smoking feel down about themselves or feel bad about themselves. It is all about giving them the tools for them to reinvent their own character, to redesign their own identity. And if they manage to redesign their identity in such a way that they no longer identify as a smoker, then leaving smoking will be just natural. It will happen effortlessly.
Well, that's exactly correct. First of all, quitting smoking is really easy. I've done it multiple times and just quit and never wanted to go back. When you quit, to make yourself go back is really hard because they taste terrible when you haven't been doing them. So quitting smoking is easy if you choose to. What you're talking about is the actual solution of a characterological change. But look at how profound that is, because what it is a death and a rebirth. Okay, right? To reinvent yourself means what you were yesterday has to be murdered and something new has to develop. Okay, that's not easy for people to do. However, to make the choice, all you have to do to quit is to choose to quit. And it's actually not hard. People say, oh, I'm so addicted. It's like, well, you don't want to quit. I don't want to quit. So if I tried using something, it wouldn't work. Actually, January and February, I quit smoking entirely. And what I did is I used these vapes to get the nicotine, but I was having some head problems. I had these migraines I'd never had before, and I just went back on everything until I could figure out what factor was causing them. So anyway, let's not talk about me and my smoking anymore. The point of what you were saying, though, is, okay, so it's characterological. Most of what you do, you're testing characterologically. And then if you're wise and intellectual, maybe you can engage in philosophy. Philosophy is not as rooted in 100,000 years, right? It's, well, these are the arguments that seem clever to me, but I can fool myself pretty easily, right? To do philosophy, you have to do it really seriously. And what's great about the Mythopoetic is that it's available to all of us. I'm not sure I would say philosophy is available to me. You know, it's like maybe it's available to 10 people in the history of the world who could really get to the answers they needed to get to on that path. We looked at some of them in our Consummate Thinkers course. But, you know, that's not to say it isn't worth doing. We did it, right? We did it because it's worth doing. But mythopoetry is a language that is immediately accessible to all of us because it's how we've been thinking and living our whole lives. And it's inescapable in a sense. Did you want to say something?
No.
There was something
You're going
else.
fine.
There was something else you said that I wanted to. It was character. Okay, the characterological, the poetic. All right. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. So we should look at that.
There's one thing. There's one thing that I
Please.
gained. There's one thing that I gained from philosophy, namely Stoicism and Buddhism, and maybe I only realized that these lessons were there because I saw the overlap and saw the recurring patterns. I saw Confucius saying it's really important to engage in the habits of self-development. The Buddhists as well, starting from Siddhartha. The Stoics emphasized self-development pretty much as well. Plato, Socrates, and so on and so forth. And I also had James Clear's Atomic Habits, which was informed by Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit. And so I realized that if you want to kill some part of yourself, as you said, and rebirth or flourish another part that you choose to nurture, and maybe even make your mind a more designs more intentionally designed thing of yourself, of your part, of your own self, be a garden of your mind. You really need to engage in daily rituals. I think it's the only way. And these daily rituals, if you engage in them, you better know what you're doing. At least base your decisions on true and tested stuff that has stood the test of time. To give you a few examples, examples that come from the peoples of the blue zones, Sardinia and Okinawa are two examples, Lesbos as well. These people, they don't go to the gym. They integrate a healthy lifestyle into their normal life. They just do stuff that is physical exercise while they're living their lives, everyday lives. And they do this effortlessly, seamlessly integrated into their daily life. I integrated physical activity in my daily life as well as a commute. And I also integrated another tested, true and tested stuff for self-development, which is after my workout, I started taking cold showers. And basically the cold shower activates a lot of subsystems of my physiology, circulatory, nervous, etc. And it's practically when I face the cold shower and I come out of the cold shower, I've basically most of the days I've faced the most challenging thing of my day. The rest is just peanuts compared to that. The normal stress in the office, it's nothing. And so there's a lot there, and probably this philosophy was informed by the mythopoetic. I see a lot of Hesiod's work and days in the Stoics and many other things, of course. Oh, Elena is just arrived.
Elena has arrived. Listen, let me ask you a series of tough questions, not because they're hard to answer, but because I'm going to ask you to really. I'm going to ask you questions about the subconscious working behind your mind. Well, by definition, we don't have access to that, right? So I'm going to ask you to focus real hard on this and see what you think the answer is. A series of little interview questions. you got into Buddhism and Stoicism. The path by which you came to understand habits and character development and the benefits of those things, are they more accurately described A or B? A, like this. Someone gave me some really good ethical arguments, and I looked at some scientific psychology studies that showed how habits were built and how we could hack our own brains and change our behavior in good ways. And I was convinced by the arguments that that would be an effective method for getting to a place that I also was convinced by arguments and philosophy was the right place for me to go. Or was it more like this? I knew where I wanted to go. I couldn't put it into words, but something told me go that way. And I resonated with the characters of people who found ways to change their habits, to discipline themselves. To be a disciplined person is characterological. And that resonated with me. And I thought, that in me, I'm going to give that life. I'm going to feed that by reading philosophy, by reading these meditative works. I'm going to try to actualize that potential in myself, because I don't know why I believe it, but there's a vision I have for moving to another place, and that would be a good place to move. And I like the way these people are moving. I think I'm one of them. I identify like that, and I want to be more like that.
I would say maybe a hint of the first one, but overwhelmingly the second one. Because when you see role models, people of that command respect, like Siddhartha or Marcus Aurelius, Socrates, these guys, they are literally going through the matrix, as you like to put it. And you see that, well, behind that they're laying it out for you. They show their lifestyle. They show what they're thinking, they're doing every day. Marcus Aurelius writing on his journal, listening to the greatest, reading Heraclitus to Plato, and these more recent guys, these Stoic teachers like Apollonius of Chalcedon and Epictetus and Musonius Rufus, and also guys from outside the Stoic tradition, and guys from skeptic tradition that were informed by Pyrrho, that went to talk with maybe the intellectual descendants of Siddhartha. And so these bright ideas have been traversing the world. And
no, wait. Put into words why I should admire them. Put into words the argument that convinced you to admire them.
Even though they've suffered, every single one of them suffered in their lives.
Sure.
They had the toolkit at their disposal, or they acquired it or developed it to transcend their suffering, and they became greater, not despite their suffering, but they even used the suffering as a raw material.
That's what you admire.
Yeah.
I'm going to be Thrasymachus now. I don't admire that. I don't admire that at all. What you're telling me is that there's this miserable person and they found a way to just keep suffering. Well, you know what? I admire the one who says, fuck you to the universe and blows shit up. Now, give me an argument why I should admire your guy instead of Cain.
Well, if everyone were like Cain, humanity would no longer be around, to kind of draw from Kant.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm as Mephistopheles, I think the suffering of being is so great that it doesn't justify it. And I want everything to come to an end, because the quiet would be better than all the suffering. So yeah, absolutely. It would bring everything to an end. Why shouldn't I want that? Here's my point. You're right to admire what you admire, but you admire it because of your character. There's no argument that you can give the devil to say, oh, you should be like God and say yes to being. It's a character. It's what he brings to the universe. And what you bring is something that resonated with those characters for that reason. You said there's something in me that vibrates when I see how they're vibrating, and I want to be more like that. So I'm not saying they're not admirable, and I'm certainly not saying that what we should do is be like Cain and not be like that. I think you're right that they're admirable. What I'm trying to point out is there are philosophical arguments, there's ethics discussions, there's science, there's all this other stuff we can do, but that's not really what's motivating us. We're living as characters in a play, and we're motivated by, like, your vision to want things to be better in the first place is not something I could argue you into, and it's not maybe something that you could invent for yourself. If you said, okay, I sat down like a blank slate and I said, here are 18 people from history. Why should I admire one or the other? I got some scales. I'll put some points on here. So it doesn't, there's no value. It doesn't tell you who to admire, right? You admire because of your character that says, I know I could be like that. And I want it because I know where it leads to. And I believe in something good. It's called faith. Okay. So we're already more in the mythopoetic realm than we even admit to ourselves, because we have to use language to communicate. And so we tend to use this propositional language, but that doesn't mean that that's at the base. What you said is maybe a sliver of that, but mostly I just admired it, right? That's what it is. You know, maybe there's a sliver of rationality. Maybe there's a sliver of a good argument. And maybe it's really worthwhile to do philosophy and hammer out all the right arguments. You know, that's all valuable, but that's not who we are. And that's why these books don't talk to us like that's who we are. Right? The books talk to us like we're characters. Here's another character. It's a way of being. How does that resonate with you? It doesn't say be this person, don't be that person. It's not a morality tale. It's, I know you. You're one of these things. Find out what you are and see what your end is going to be, right? There's fate and destiny and character in this vocabulary of narrative.
You could go even further. These books like Ovid and Rumi's writings, they don't just talk to us like we are human beings made of flesh and bone and blood. They talk to us like as if we were avatars of gods.
What have we been saying? How do we have personality? The universe as a whole, if we're Darwinian, has shaped us into something that will fit in well with it. Why did it produce personality? The universe as a whole, is that distinguishable from God? We're made in his image. Absolutely. There's a spark of the divine. We're going to be reading about it, right?
This was
from the gods.
This was made so vivid when I read the Ramayana. It's incredibly vivid that these guys, the admirable characters, they are all avatars of gods. And so when you find admirable people, the Ramayana is kind of hinting, well, see that they are admirable. You probably should look into them more attentively. Maybe that old guy isn't just an old guy. It's Athena disguised as an old guy.
Yeah. Right. Oh, do I admire this person's character, or am I still thinking I wish I had his money, babes, and Bugattis? Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, do I admire the character, or am I not even thinking in the proper way and I'm distracted by something else? So see if the person's actually admirable by learning to think characterologically. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to throw shade at anybody in particular with the Bugatti comment. Sorry about that, actually, because I don't know that person very well. And, you know, I don't know him because I wasn't interested, but also I don't know him. So whatever. Okay, so that was an amazing setup. This is what we're going to do now. We came here to talk about what it means to think mythopoetically, and we've been doing a great job discussing that. I want to see what notes I have, or maybe we'll just look at this reading here. Oh, shoot. I know I opened it. Where is it? Where are you, my city? There it is. Okay. This is the first function of mythology. Okay. Let's see if reading this is worthwhile right now. Maybe I'll just look at my notes real quickly and see what else we could cover here. All right. So before we talk about the Jungian keys, which we've talked about a few of them in this recording already, about how to unlock the meaning of the stories so that we can engage with them properly and get out of them what we're supposed to, you know, be able to get out of them, which is really an experience. Like, in other words, it's not propositions as we talked about, but it's something unfathomable. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about the nature of thinking as a mythopoetic person would have thought. So there's a lot I disagree with about this essay, but there's a lot that's really useful. So why don't I look at my notes here? And he says, the mythopoetic conception of the universe is one that is permeated by intentions and agency. Right? I've been saying personality and characterological. Intentions and agency, right? I'm walking up a hill. I'm trying to succeed at life. It's not working out well for me. Maybe my car is broken and the wind is blowing against me. Why is the wind against me? Why is everything against me, right? I'm thinking mythopoetically when that thought pops into my head. Now, what I might do is say, look, the wind doesn't know I'm here, and that's a stupid question. I'll answer it scientifically and ignore it. But I also sort of can't stop myself from thinking that at times, right? So maybe I should find a mythopoetic solution to the problem and maybe say, well, the wind is blowing against me because why wouldn't I pay attention to everything not working? There's something I need to sort out. I'm not pointed in the right direction. And so it's yet again just another thing. All right. In any case, they see intention and agency in everything. This view of the world doesn't so much, okay, this is important. It doesn't personify inanimate objects or non-human animals. It sounds like that's what I was saying. Why is the wind against me? To think mythopoetically is not to personify. It simply doesn't recognize a distinction between personhood as human and things that are not human. So to personify is to have two categories and then put the persona or the personification into the things that you don't think of as having that. Instead, when you're talking in this dream realm of deities as personalities that are forces of being, when you're talking like that, you just see personality in everything. There is nothing that isn't like that. Okay? It might be incidental that the wind happens to be blowing against me, but the wind is a personality, right? We're going to read about the wind. That's a bad one because we understand, or we imagine we understand how wind works. But we assume that the nonlinear chaotic system that can't make predictions about the wind accurately is capable of describing it scientifically.
Or quantum phenomena.
Yes. Okay. Right. So we assume, we assume that ultimately science will be able to explain everything and all of that, but we don't have those explanations. And in any case, when we read King Lear or Hamlet, we get into the story and into the characters, and we read it. We're not saying to ourselves all the time, well, historically, the Eisenhower Castle didn't exactly have a person of this name at this time, and I bet he didn't say that to Horatio. It's like you're an idiot if you're reading Hamlet and you're thinking that the whole time. Likewise, this is narrative, but it's mythopoetic narrative, so it's like meta-narrative. So it's like, Peterson described it this way once. He said, take all the stories of all the lives of all the people that you're paying careful attention to, if you're living a long time ago trying to figure out who you are in the world and what you need to think about, and sort of extract the commonalities between them and write a really good play. That's what Shakespeare might have been doing. Now, take all of the really, really good plays and figure out what's common between them and write the drama version in relationship to that. Now you're talking scripture, right? That's one way of thinking about it. In any case, in that realm, as we enter it, we're not thinking, oh, is this historically accurate, Shakespeare? Likewise, we're not thinking to ourselves, is that really how the wind works? Is it really the intention of the god from time to time? Do lightning bolts get thrown by Zeus? It's as stupid to think that way when reading the story as it would be to say, did King Lear really say that at that day, at that time, in that kingdom? Did he even exist? It's like you're missing the point of the story. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is stop recognizing a distinction between personhood as human and things that are not human. Things that are not human. The human experience of the world is personal, and the subjective personal perspective is projected as existing in all other things outside the individual as well. Now, to help us adopt that a little better, let's talk about that as not so stupid as it sounds to us in our scientism perspective. I don't know what it's like to be a rock, and I don't know what it's like to be a flea, and I don't know what it's like to be a bat. The only thing I know what it's like to be is me, but what it's like to be is like something. It's like something. It's not that I'm a robot that had inputs and put out outputs. Seeing yellow, there's a quality to it. Feeling pain feels like something, okay? So my experience of the subjective nature of being is real to me, and it's the only evidence I have of what it's like to be anything. So why should I start by assuming that everything else isn't like that? Maybe the other people are like that, but the robots are animals and the rocks are dead matter, and nothing in the world has any level of what it's like to be. The qualia of being isn't resonating on any of those other levels. Now, we say to ourselves, well, it's pretty stupid to imagine that rocks feel anything, or that they contemplate anything, or that they know of their own existence. Okay, maybe. Sure, that seems a little extreme, but you don't have to go that far. You can say there are levels of development of consciousness, okay? But this level's pretty sophisticated, and it still has a subjective, there's a qualia to it all. Why shouldn't I assume that there's a developmental level of that on everything else as well? Or at least assume that something at least that great consists in the universe as a whole, right? Or maybe the subpersonalities of the deities, which we've already talked about how they could be above us, right? So we'll talk about that again really quickly and just say rage, lust, Venus, Mars, these are personalities, according to this language, that exist in the world. Well, it's hard to find a better descriptor of what it's like to be in the world than to say, you know, those people and how sometimes they don't look like themselves, but they all look like each other in the moment that they're all in a rage. You know, Fred, when he's in a rage, looks more like Henry when he's in a rage than either of them look like themselves when they're in a rage. It's kind of like there's this other personality that can possess you, and you look more like that, and you do things that you regret. You say, why did I do that? And that was so bad. And you say, where did you go when your friend is possessed by lust or rage? And it's like, okay, that seems like an accurate description of what it's like to be, at least to be human. And so we don't have to have a panpsychic perspective that the trees and the rocks all have thoughts to say we don't have to go that far to adopt the idea that there's at least human personalities, and that there may be personalities higher than that that are a part of things. And again, if we embrace a radical Darwinism and we say, well, how the hell did the cosmos produce things with personalities when all it was doing was killing anything that didn't fit in well enough with it? If it is so wrong to conceptualize it in that way, well, you want to conceptualize it as dead matter with energy. That's pretty sophisticated. It's a useful way of simplifying everything so that you can figure out which ball will roll down a hill, but you also take away air resistance when you do that calculation, and you know that that's not true. And, you know, we won't go into it all, but we know philosophically that the concept of an object is a fiction. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's a useful fiction, but it's not less fictional than other types of language that we can adopt. So like we said before, we have different tools in different areas. And if you want to settle an empirical question, go figure it out with science, right? There's two wrong ways we could read this. The one wrong way would be to say, I'm going to use science to prove it's all not true scientifically. The other wrong way would be to say, I'm going to find all the scientific truth in it and ignore empirical tests because that must be the way the world actually is. Both of those are making the same mistake and being idiotic in the way they read it. Rather, we could say adopting the fiction of objects external to myself with length, breadth, and width that have certain properties and all of that stuff that we have to assume to do science. We know that's not the fundamental nature of being. We just know it's a really useful way to model things. That's fine. Of course it is. We're not binning science here. We recognize that that's useful and we love it. And we say, yeah, the scientists are the ones in charge of questions like that. So if you think you found an empirical truth, go ask them. However, that doesn't mean that that's the tool we always have to be using. In fact, we're not going to be able to understand Hamlet if we're always concerned with proving it isn't historically accurate. And we're not going to be able to understand the mythopoetic books that we're reading if we say, I can prove that Zeus isn't physically in a specific location with a specific weight and a specific color that reflects off his skin. You're missing the point. Okay, that's just not understanding the point. Okay, so that's the first thing, to adopt the I thou perspective instead of the I it perspective, right? That's how he sums it up in this essay. Is that the mythopoetics looked at the world and they said, it's me and it's you, and we're in relationship. Let's figure out how to wrestle properly. Let's figure out how to cooperate. Let's figure out who I need to be aware of, what sacrifices and propitiations to what personalities I need to make in order to thrive towards a vision of a better world, or to whatever it is that my character brings as an aim. Okay, so the first one is the I thou versus the I it.
So it is a scheme or a pattern of thinking that facilitates humility instead of egocentrism. And we see a lot of egocentrism around us nowadays.
It's also completely ridiculous. I mean, we just finished. Look, we're not against philosophy and we're not against science. We just finished an intense course on philosophy where we really dove into philosophical ideas and arguments. We're not against any of that. It's just ridiculously idiotic there would be no reason to read a book 3 pages long like that, let alone a book this big that's written the way it's written, if that's the way we were thinking. We're just not going to understand it unless we give that up. And so, yeah, there's a humility there. When we get to the Jungian keys, you're going to, since you're resonating with identifying the importance of being properly reverent before text like this, you're going to like the Jungian keys for sure, because we'll have a few other humility keys that come up there. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to add people if they want to speak. So I don't know who this is, but we'll add you in here. Okay. We said I thou instead of I it. There's a consequence to that. We can dive in deeper into the consequence of that, and it's this. To the mythopoetic, there's no distinction between knowing facts about the world and knowing yourself. Those are the same thing. Okay? You don't know yourself unless you know what you're like when you jump out of an airplane. You don't know yourself unless you know, you learn about yourself and develop yourself in relationship to other people. Well, they see all of nature as other personalities, right? They don't have to be animistic. They don't have to say there's the god of the tree and the god of the rock, but they see the basic stage of being as I'm a personality. There's other people I can see who are personalities. And then there's these other powerful personalities, and relating to those things. That's the thing I'm concerned with. That's what matters. Because that's what matters. Knowing them is also knowing yourself. When we looked at the synthesis between the mythopoetic and the philosophical in Socrates and in Nietzsche in our last course, we said Nietzsche's Zarathustra is characterological. He's taking his character, smashing it against another character, sparks are flying, and you're gaining insights into who this person is and who Zarathustra is and in who you are by engaging in that process. That's how this is working, right? If I learn something about the world, it's you know what it is? I never thought of it this way. It's a Heisenberg uncertainty and analog. Right? You can't know something about the electron without affecting the electron, right? So you're also knowing something about yourself. The star can't emit the electron or emit the photon unless your eye is there for it to hit 100,000 years later, which is ridiculous, but apparently true according to the scientists. So everything is in relationship to everything else. And so to know anything else is to know more about yourself at the same time. And there's no distinction between the two. If I learn something about myself, I've learned something about the nature of being. So I've learned something about the cosmos. If I learn something about the cosmos, that's because it's in relationship. I've smashed myself against Zeus. I've smashed myself against Venus. I've become friends with Cupid. Whatever the heck it is, I'm learning about myself and the world, because the knowledge I gain is not two pieces of knowledge. It's one piece of knowledge that is both those things. Fair enough? Or does that sound crazy?
No, it does not sound crazy at all. I think I'm becoming more acutely aware of the importance of mythopoetic thinking, and without necessarily becoming kind of one-itis with mythopoetic thinking and abdicating from the other the other
Sure.
rungs of thinking. They
Right.
are all equally important, but maybe it's more prevalent in society for people to be unaware that they have myths that are making them lead less than optimal lives, and wretchedness and whatnot, and depression, nihilism, etc. It's mostly coming from the mythopoetic realm, not from philosophy,
It's
not so
nine,
much from philosophy, not so much from science. If people
nine.
solve this thing, yeah, go ahead.
No, you're right. You're right. I'm jumping into here. 99.999% of people can't think at all. Thinking is a hard thing to do. And I'm not even saying I can do it. I'm saying to be a thing that thinks is hard. Most people bounce ideas off of other people. It's a relational thing. And then they see how those people react. And then they say, I don't like that reaction, so I'll stop saying that thing. I'll stop believing the thing. The idea won't matter to me. But they're outsourcing the thinking to everybody around them. Okay. You and I are mythopoetic 90% of the time, at least, probably 99% of the time, without realizing it, right? I mean, or maybe with realizing it. But like you said, I admired these people because I had a vision. That's my character, had a vision for something better. And I saw that the way they were is the way I could be, and that it was better than what I was, and that it was aiming at something better, which I also wanted to go to. All of those pieces are characterological and mythopoetic, and they're what you are, whether you like it or not. The fun thing is, I still think this language is deeper than the philosophical or the scientific, right? I think this is really getting to the, so it's not like, oh gosh, I'm still so mythopoetic, I hope I get more rational. It's like, well, you might get more idiotic if you get more rational. Most ideas are wrong if any of them are right, because they all disagree with each other. So, okay, you know what I mean? Now, that's, again, we did a lot of philosophy. We like philosophy. We're not dumping on it. And science is great too, for few people who are actually scientific to do
But
it. Benefits us.
there's also a lot of enmeshing. When you read Plato's dialogues, there's a lot of myth enmeshed with science. If you read the Ionian guys, Thales, Xenophanes
Good.
would make declamations of poetry involving the gods, and he was trying to rehabilitate the images of the gods that he was so frustrated that the images of the gods were so poorly depicted as not even well-behaved humans by Homer and Hesiod, and so there's a lot of overlap and
Okay.
enmeshing between mythopoetic and philosophy. Maybe even more than between philosophy and science. Maybe the distinction is a bit more clear-cut between philosophy and science, though. If someone really wants to become a top-notch scientist and really do something really groundbreaking, they really need to have their epistemology really well figured
Well,
out.
all of the greatest scientists that anybody remembers were also philosophers, and they're only remembered for their philosophical contribution. Darwin is not remembered because he figured out one question of how a specific species, I mean, we remember that he did that, but we've answered the same types of questions a billion other times now. He's remembered for the philosophical work of granting clarity to the concepts with his tripartite formula of saying, wait a minute, there's some things in tension here. There's heredity, there's random variety, and there's nature selecting advantageous variety. With that, we can conceptualize how life is related. That was all philosophical. It was not like he discovered that under a microscope, okay? So, yeah, I basically see scientists as we've said it's a different language, but it's a sub language. I call them the GIMP slaves of philosophers. Once we clarify things enough, we make them go do a bunch of dirty work for us to answer a bunch of questions which are now amenable to empirical verification or empirical testing. Right now that we've got the ideas clear enough, go do all that stuff and add to our knowledge. I'm sure we'll build a rocket ship out of it. Isn't that great? But it's only because we did philosophy to make it possible. And you don't even know what you're talking about unless the philosopher is interpreting what you're saying. And often, scientists will talk about, well, we don't want to get into all this again. Scientists will do bad philosophy a lot of the time too, obviously. But so do philosophers. So in any case, you brought up that Socrates and the overlap and the enmeshing. I wish you were there for the beginning of our class. The whole point of the Consummate Thinkers course was to make that point. I wept when we read his death. And in the last day of his life, he said something which is true. It's how he thought about his life. And we can't prove it all right here, but I'm going to just tell you I think it's true. If Socrates had not drunk the hemlock as if he was thirsty, everything he said before was a lie, meant the opposite of what he said it meant. All of the conversations about justice and the good life were utterly meaningless. They're a way of tricking people to pass the time so you can grab onto a few more years of life. We wouldn't remember his name. We wouldn't have Plato and Aristotle, and likely we would have nothing like a university. Whatever we had for education would be nothing like. He changed thousands of years of history, and he did it characterologically. He synthesized action and thought. And that's one of the definitions we had for the 6 consummate thinkers that we were looking at in that course. So 100%, we'll be doing that course again.
He was like practicing midwifery at the moment of his death.
He even admitted what you said. He admitted it at the time of his death. He said this. He said, look, we've been doing philosophy. I'm going to paraphrase. We've been doing philosophy. We've been making arguments. We've been sharpening and sophisticating propositions. We've been doing that. Do you know I was tricking you the whole time? And what we've really been doing is trying to get our souls oriented properly in relationship to justice. He didn't just use that word. He spelled it out. He said the Son is the source of truth, beauty, goodness, and justice and love. And we need to know it like we know each other, know it like Adam knew his wife. And we've been clarifying our ideas to get rid of the bad ones so that we can relate to it, so that our characters can be changed by it, so that we can have wisdom and see things. But I know nothing until after I drink the hemlock and die and reunited with it. He spelled out his conscious comprehension that what he was mythopoetic at its base. Exactly like it's not just that he talked about gods and myths, it's that he was an embodiment of a way of being that is Christ and Socrates. They say there's a relationship to the truth that I embody that none of you do, and you're going to have to kill me for it. And I conquer the world, and the whole world will be different after this because of me doing so and taking up the hemlock or taking up the cross. That's a story. Socrates is a Christ story, and that is a mythopoetic story. So yeah, 100%. Even more than just overlap, it enmeshes, like you said.
We would also not have the Hellenistic schools of philosophy, Stoics, Cynics, Skeptics, and Epicureans, most probably without any Socrates. And
we wouldn't have it preserved for us.
Yeah, and this would completely change how Christianity developed, because the later Platonists influenced Christianity very, very much.
There might not have been any Christianity. Nietzsche said Christianity is Plato for the masses.
Maybe we would be all Mithraists or something like that, because Mithraism was competing at the time. Or maybe we would all be polytheists.
So now we ask ourselves, how silly is the idea that you're going to die and then conquer life and death itself and change the world and conquer the world? Well, they did it. They said that's what they were doing, and they did it. We are living in a different world because of those two characters. We're going to read about a third that also is of that same hero story, right? So there's hero stories, and then there's the meta hero story, and then there's the Christ type story, right? The really mythopoetic version. We're going to be reading about one of them who's in that same category. There's two major hero stories. One that essentially says to the overconfident system that thinks it owns the truth, you don't know as much as you think. You're not as right as you think you are. And then is murdered, has to accept death as the proper sentence for doing so, and then conquers the world, and it's forever changed after because of that. And then the other one is the hero who goes into the chaotic realm and cuts it into pieces, like we were talking about before, and makes something ordered out of it that is habitable and good for life.
But keep in mind though that myths like the Marduk Tiamat myth are kind of praising and showcasing violence as being a god, in a sense. When you have a lot of myths that showcase violence as the utmost thing that is needed.
Well, wait a minute. How so?
Well, it's kind of like Tiamat is evil, no, without any conditionals, and only with the utter destruction and dismemberment of Tiamat can the world come into being. There could not be any other way of them kind of coming together in a more peaceful manner and creating the world like your dog is going crazy. Creating the world like a creation couple.
Hey, buddy, sit. Relax, okay? Just relax. Relax. It's okay. You don't have to be so crazy. Sit. It's just a cardinal and my dog. Relax. I'm so sorry. Continue, please.
Yeah, there was this Christian scholar who wrote a critique about the myths of redemptive violence. That he mentioned, of course, the Babylonian creation myth, but many others, like, for instance, Popeye and his, I think it was Brutus, who was constantly kidnapping Popeye's girlfriend.
Bluto or Brutus? I think Bluto.
Yeah, one of those. And
it means ugly in Italian. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
And of course, the unfolding of the episodes was pretty much the same thing retold in different ways. And this is exposing the children to the idea that violence is an answer.
Okay, wait. All right.
Without stating it correctly.
Well, hold on a second. You might be right that that's what the story is saying, but I've got two questions. Let's ask these two questions. The first one is a story that says, oops, hold on. I'm going to sleep on my, can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Okay, the stupid computer went to sleep mode. I'm sorry. Okay, I can see you now. Okay, the story which says civilization and humanity and being itself cannot thrive unless you murder chaos itself, which is coming to contend with you and take you out. That's not immediately properly interpreted as go and be violent against anything that seems like a threat necessarily, right? The story is about Tiamat. It represents chaos as chaos, vengefully trying to destroy us for not living up to a godly standard that had existed before things started getting noisy and complicated, something like that.
But take into account that I'm not criticizing the myth per se. I'm criticizing how people that are more or less simple-minded will look at will interpret the myth, and they will say, violence is a good thing. We'll just use violence and solve all problems. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so you're already past the first question. Now I'm going to try a harder one to defend for me, and let's throw this curveball out there and see how you hit this one. If the story is telling you that a giant bully has to be met with violence, is the story wrong? If the story's telling you you're going to come across people that will use violence against you, and you better be able to, not be violent to everyone. That's what the evil character's like. That's what Bluto's like. He's violent to push everybody around. You're in love with a girl. You're nice and sweet. You have to actually tap into some extra courage that makes you able to fight. You got to eat your spinach in order to be able. So prepare your body for the fact that these are real problems. Is that story saying go around and be violent all the time?
Yeah, of course not. It would be a huge extrapolation in these kinds of stories. Another example is the He-Man show from the 80s, where the antagonists, the evil, the bad guys, are drawn in such a starkly different manner as the good guys that they almost look like different art styles, and they clearly depict these are the bad guys, and so we meet them with violence, and these are the good guys, we are all friends and whatnot. And so yeah, there's kind of like an ethics underpinning there. It's kind of, it could read as at a surface level as the superficial aesthetics of people could inform you about their goodness or badness, but that would be, of course, a really surface and simplistic reading. But if you go deeper and do like Socrates, you would kind of figure out,
Okay.
These people
Good.
have ugly souls.
All right.
And so probably you will need to be wary of them. You need to develop self-defense skills and whatnot. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So we're past the second level of criticism. That's great. So the first level, you agree, we agree. We both say, okay, if this story is about big cosmic truths, then love fighting with truth is not really saying go and box people. It's this thing. Okay. But then there's this other level where sometimes the story is saying, there are things that are going to try to kill you and everything you love, and you need to prepare yourself physically and mentally for that fact, and be courageous and all of that. So you're on that. So now the next level of question is, for criticism to the story, let's stick with Popeye. The next level of criticism, which I didn't laugh because it's a bad idea. I laughed because it's great. Do you remember the South Park episode? There was a 3-part episode called Imagination Land, where they go into the world of the Mythopoetic, the world of all the made-up characters. And there's this scene where the 9 wise council meet, and it's all the greatest characters in the history of literature and mythology. And it's Aslan and Jesus and Zeus, and they're all deciding how to fight against the forces of the evil characters. And so it goes from one character to another. And then Morpheus is talking. He's at the Council of the 9 Elders. And then it switches over to Popeye, who's like, he's like one of the greatest. Anyway, that's why I was laughing. I'm sorry. All right. So we understand that the story has a sophisticated meaning. We understand that it can be applicable in a violence lesson sense as well sometimes. So sometimes it's not about that at all, but sometimes it has that. The next level of criticism is, what do you think an unsophisticated child is getting out of the story when they see the story? So if that's the level of criticism that says, look, we can understand it, but if a child watches Popeye, the child's going to think I should go around and act like Bluto and beat everybody up. Or if I conceptualize someone as Bluto, I'm probably right, and so I have a right to fight him and beat him up. Something like that. Are you there? I can't hear you. Oh, shoot.
Sorry, I had muted. Okay. So as a father of a 5-year-old, I can see that kind of happening. So he sees shows that are tunes with good guys and bad guys, like Dragon Ball or something like that. I haven't yet gone on to graduate to Popeye, but we'll get there.
But you're not going to keep it from him. You're not going to keep it from him because it's too violent. Okay.
No. Because we saw Dragon Ball together, Dragon Ball Super, and so yeah, he sees that, and but he also has he's developing some ethics and some self-awareness, and he clearly doesn't kind of identify random people or many people as evil, even though he has peers in his kindergarten that are kind of uh, random and kind of push others randomly just for the kicks or something like that. He doesn't identify them as evil. He already starts to see them as these guys that they aren't so aware as they might that they should be, to avoid being so random and push other people just for the kicks of it. And so yeah, I think that we can have these relatively um, violence filled stories, but we can at the same time develop a pro-social ethics system.
Okay. Here's a good question. Why does a 3 or 4 year old child rewatch the same Disney movie every single day?
Yeah, that's a really great question. um, Maybe as we've alluded to in previously, maybe it resonated with them, something in it resonated with them, and
Perfect.
and when they realize that it resonated with them, each rewatch is kind of nurturing some part of their character.
The meaning that's in the story is unfathomable. You can always get more by reading it again. That's the first thing. And two, what you said has to be the case. What's the answer to why do I find this meaningful? Because I find it meaningful, right? The only answer to the question, why would you watch Pinocchio again? Again? You want to watch Pinocchio? I'm going to kill myself if I have to sit and watch Pinocchio again. Well, Pinocchio's pretty damn good. So if the child, as you say, is resonating, it's speaking to them. What I mean is they wouldn't be attending to it if they weren't hearing something, right? What it's saying they're hearing. Now, as you rightly point out, they can't put it into words. They can't turn it into propositions. They can't have an ethical debate about it. They don't know what it means. It's just entertainment as far as they're concerned. If you ask them, they might say, I like it, right? And adults do that too. Why do you go to the movies? I like them. Adults don't know why they watch movies. They watch movies because they're telling the same stories. They watch movies because what they're being presented with are the deepest archetypes saying this is who you are and this is what life's like. Now, some of them can then write long essays extrapolating all these propositional statements and saying the story means this and it means that. But those people are not going to get to the bottom of it. And those people would never say, read all my essays about the wisdom that's in this movie and you don't have to watch the movie. Right? Right? So when we say the mythopoetic is meaningful, that it's so meaningful that all of the money that humans have put into copper and aluminum wires and telephone poles and communication systems and power grids is nothing compared to how much money that they spend on entertainment, on movies, on things that are talking to them directly in mythopoetic. And most of those wires are being used to transfer those things too. So we're not even able to separate it and say, well, the power is a utility and the movie is an entertainment. Actually, the power is useful mostly because it's helping us to engage with things that are speaking to us, even if we can't put them into words, or even if ultimately, by definition, we can only partially put them into words. Okay?
You're kind of pinpointing the source code of civilization.
Of being. I mean, I'm not sure I'm pinpointing it, but I'm pointing to say, I think this is where it is. I think if we read this properly, you and I are going to be able to engage directly with the most meaningful presentation of our lives and what it's like to be, even more so than anything we got out of the philosophical, because we could barely understand it, and we were trying hard, and we were wrestling with geniuses, and maybe we would adopt it or whatever. But this is going to speak right to us. It'll speak to a 4-year-old, and the 4-year-old won't be able to put it into philosophical propositional words. It doesn't mean they're not hearing something, right? Why else are they watching it? Okay. So, and all of what I said about movies and utilities, I think we could probably throw all of that out and say, how much money would the city of Paris have if it had no art in it? How many people would be tourists there? Would the place be dead? Would it be like the amount of value, financial value, which we just say that's a way of measuring what we're valuing and what's meaningful and valuable to us in art? Art and beauty might be, no, art and beauty almost certainly is the most valuable from a utility economics calculus perspective of everything we do. You go ahead and be a computer programmer all you want. I don't mean that because I think you are one. I don't know what you do exactly, but go right. Go do something super valuable in a utility sense. Eat your heart out. Eat your heart out. A bunch of peasants spent 300 years building a cathedral, and that has more value every year. It doesn't depreciate, right? So not only is it valuable, I just heard this today. Peterson had pointed this out. It gets more valuable with time, which is pretty strange, right? Make 1 billion electric cars, and in 20 years, they're not worth shit. They're actually a problem. Build a cathedral, and 2,000 years from now, it'll be worth even more. Okay. I won't make that comment. Okay, so I was going to make a stupid political joke. So now we're really getting into the meat of it. Man, this is having discussions with you is so much more fruitful than if I was going through notes and trying to just sort of talk about these things. I mean, a lot of I'm not complaining, but a lot of the Twitter spaces, I felt like with Twitter, there really wasn't the ability to have a lot of back and forth. I think we did some great stuff there, and I think it was really valuable. But I knew all the time that what I was talking about, like we've been talking about the Mythopoetic in the Consummate Thinkers course for months now. And I'm sure nobody understood what I was trying to say there as much as anybody who watched just 1 or 2 of these videos that we've done right now. So this is so valuable.
But are these videos directly live streaming to your YouTube channel, or will you upload them later?
So they're directly live streaming as private to the YouTube channel because I'm still trying to slow down how quickly people come in here, and we'll just start building it slowly. But there is a link that anybody can come to through Twitter right now, and nobody's coming, and through the locals thing, which I don't have like an account following on there. But I've put it on locals and I've put it on Twitter, so people could be here and they're not interested in it, or they don't, or they think it's not free or something.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, they can watch this later, and more people will slowly come in as we keep doing this. But I don't know. I haven't watched your other stuff that you do, so I might be wrong about this. But for me, this is the most valuable conversation that is being put on the internet right now. I think this is a great thing that we're doing.
Likewise, there are thoughts, no doubt, that I'm having thanks to having a dialogue with you that I would never have otherwise. So there is huge value in this. And if I had to choose between a lot of people and some chaos versus a smaller amount of people and a focused signal, way better quality of a quantity, man.
Let's just do it right. I mean, honestly, I just want to do it right, and then as people come in or whatever, that'll be fine. Slowly, maybe I'll just ban them all, and we'll just keep doing it, the 2 of us. That's fine with me. So look, let's do this. Should we read through the rest of these bullet points about thinking mythopoetically, or is it not even possible? And I'm just going to go off on long tangents, and we're going to have long discussions.
No, go ahead and read those.
All right,
those
let's do another one. Let's do another one and see what happens, at least. Okay, so it says this. Not limited by the principle that the only meaningful things one can say about the world have to be measurable, have to have measurable consequences to them, right? Not limited by the rules of science. We already understand that. We've discussed science, philosophy, and the mythopoetic as these three realms already, so we know what that's saying. But there's something else we could say about that. So we've been talking about dreams, and we've been talking about images. I should pull up the painting. I'm not gonna do it right now. There's a painting from ancient Egypt that shows the sun god Ra as I should face the camera as a firmament. I think it was Ra. Forgive me, I'm not an Egyptologist. I know very little about this, but there's a deity in any case in this painting that looks something like this. He's like a bull with long legs stretched out over, providing shade and protection underneath him. And he also appears as three other characters in the same painting. Okay, what the hell is going on here? Well, when you dream, the rules of space and time restrictions don't apply. We said that these mythopoetic prophets are getting in touch with the basic nature of being, and that might be dreamlike. And the paintings they give us are following the rules of dreams and not the rules of spatial temporal limitations that we understand in our waking life. Okay, so we already understand that they're not trying to do science, and that criticizing them for not getting science right is just misreading them. But there's another sense in which they're not concerned with empirical consequence, which is you're missing the story if you, we already know you're missing the story if you think, well, Zeus, if he was a person, couldn't turn into a bull. Okay, fine, that's missing the story. But also, you're missing the story if you don't understand that Cupid has wings, so he flies higher than the other gods, but the gods appear wherever the hell they want to, and they're flying around all the time. And both of those are true at the same time, right? We'll talk about how to, when we get to the Jungian keys, we'll talk about how to understand the difference, where we can actually say, okay, he's got wings, so he's higher than the others that don't have wings, but the others also can be anywhere they want and shift and follow dreamlike rules. So why would you have to fly, and why would that be a benefit? We'll be able to make that distinction of the hierarchies, while at the same time not being confused or shocked by the fact that this is in a dreamlike realm where space and time and other things those rules don't apply. Fair enough?
I would say that if the author of the myth that involves these godlike characters needs something to happen that is like a Deus Ex Machina, but fits with their characters, he will do that.
Yeah. I think, okay, so if I tried to write a mythopoetic story, it would be Deus Ex Machina, right? It would be, well, I need this thing to happen. We'll talk about with the Jungian keys. I'm going to try to approach this very humbly and with a lot of reverence and say, it's being depicted that way because that's the way it actually is, or that's the way at least the foggy vision of the great prophet was able to see it. And so that's why he's saying it. And if it didn't happen that way, he would have just told a different story. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. So that's interesting. Let's see what this says. The principles which govern the rules by which one can talk about the world in the mythopoetic are not scientific. This is true, but also they do exist. Primarily, the difference between the rules which govern here and those of the scientific perspective is that the rules which govern the mythopoetic talk about the cosmos are not internalized by any... Okay, so this is another point we can make. We already made this point. Not internalized by an individual thinker. They cannot be because they function outside the mind of the person doing the mythopoetic speculation and advancement of thought from that perspective and taking place over many millennia. We talked about all of that before. The scientific world... Oops. The scientific worldview has rules which can be consciously learned and followed. Okay, so this is leaving the rules of space and time, and we're just talking about the actual process as best I can just talk about. Okay, let's explain what we're doing right now. We've just been slagging off propositional, analytical, argumentative, dialectic philosophy. Not to say it's not worthwhile, but that we're going to try to do something else. It's worth noting that the only communication you and I can have with each other are these propositional statements I'm telling you, right? I mean, we can relate to each other and we might resonate with character if we have any, or if I have any, but that could happen too. But while we're talking and thinking, we're doing propositions. So what the heck are we doing? Well, we're not doing mythology. We're talking about mythology, right? Because that's the only way we can talk and communicate ideas. So we're using propositions, but we're not to understand, to talk about mythology. And right now we're talking not about just the rules that apply in the realm because it's dreamlike, but we're also talking about maybe the way in which the person gets to those truths, right? So the scientist can just rely on all of his peers and the system to basically sort of do something that might be valuable. But if he's a real scientist, he can internalize the methods and the processes. And if he's a real scientist like Feynman, he instinctively embodies those. I mean, Feynman is characterologically a scientist, right? He instinctively understands that from the time he was extremely young. And that's why he's so amazing. But to be, as Alan Bloom pointed out, to be a scientist is a very rare kind of a thing. It's much rarer than the number of people who have scientist in the job title of what they do. But that's okay because the system sort of forces them through peer review and through checks of how our work is done conglomeratively to sort of kind of appear scientific. I mean, all 50% of scientific papers are proven not to be accurate and not reproducible, at least within a year. So the system's working to push 50% of them to look like science for more than 12 months, right? But it's still pushing us, right? I actually have a lot of respect for science because it's like a set of rules that have to be harshly enforced to drag a bunch of poop-throwing apes kicking and screaming against their will towards some form of objectivity, right? What you don't do with science is say, oh, if you have a lab coat, I just trust what you say. What you say is the reason science is so precious, the reason why it's so valuable is that it's hard to do, and that if you mix it with anything else, it gets squashed pretty quickly. And so that's an argument for having reverence for the methods of science and enforcing them and caring about them. So I'm not, again, trying to bin it and throw it out, but what we can understand is that most people can't think scientifically, even if they have scientist as their job title. In any case, a good scientist could, however, internalize the rules, internalize the principles, and apply them consciously and purposefully. And again, like Feynman, you could do it instinctively too if you're really good. Like he's like an artist of sciences. But in any case, you can't internalize principles and rules. Even the mythopoetics themselves start out by saying, "Oh, you muses, speak within me. Use me as a vessel to tell this important story," right? So they're telling us that they don't have the ability to dream properly enough to give us this beautiful picture of what's really out there in that dream world. So I think it's silly for us to think we're going to come up with a set of principles you could learn and internalize to be able to do it. You just sort of have to be an artist to be an artist. Fair enough?
Yeah, they are positioning themselves as vessels or as the what's the word, the
inspired, divinely inspired.
Yeah, divinely inspired.
Revelation.
They're being like a portal to another dimension, as if it were.
It's a portal. He's saying it explicitly. He's saying, look, we could read the first line of the Metamorphoses. I'm sure it does it, right? Book 1. Now I shall tell of things that change. New being out of old, since you, O gods, created mutable arts and gifts, give me the voice to tell the shifting story of the world from its beginning to this present hour. Okay? He's explicitly doing what you just said, asking to be a portal. He's saying the gods created a world of mutability. I will describe to you how that world comes into being, what that world is like from the beginning till now, but not because I know it or have the ability to tell it, but I'm asking the gods who did it to speak through me and make it possible to tell this story. Who could understand the things I'm talking about? And when we read it, we're going to look at how it doesn't contradict pop contemporary scientific understanding, our scientific understanding, and maybe even predicts it or describes better the history of the universe than our best scientific description so far. I'm not claiming that right now. I'm saying those are questions we'll ask ourselves while we read it and say, is there truth about the nature of being and the history of the cosmos that's in this that is not only not contradicted by science, might even have predicted a lot of science that we did, or at least doesn't outrage the science, but maybe even is deeper than the science goes. Something like, we'll ask those questions as we go. But in any case, if it can do that, and the person who knows they can tell the story says, I couldn't possibly tell a story like that. Gods who did it all speak through me that I may tell this story as necessary to even begin the story. Let's just take it seriously. Do you have a different theory? Maybe he was a really good philosopher and he figured out a bunch of philosophical truths accurately through his harsh thinking and then didn't want to give us any of those arguments, but tried to decode it all in a story. I don't think that's as likely as he felt inspired. Like the cosmos or gods themselves spoke to him. He got a picture, just like you can know things or see things in your dream and you don't know where they're coming from. That's how he's working, and he's conscious of that fact. He's saying exactly like you said, he's asking to be a portal. He says, I can see this. I don't know what it all means, but if the gods will help me to see it and help me to be careful with how I depict it to you, you could see it too. Well, that's what he's saying he's doing. And that is not an internalized method, right? He's not saying I've internalized the rules for how to get this to happen. He's saying I've been having these wild dreams and I'm understanding something. I don't know what it means, but I think I can depict it for you in an artistic way where you can see it too, and then meditate on it. And maybe we can figure this out in other ways too, or something like that. Anyway, I shouldn't keep repeating myself. You get what I'm saying, yeah? Okay, the scientific worldview, in most cases where good science is being done. Okay, but the mythopoetic expert, quote unquote, advances knowledge of the universe under a system of rules. Oh, I just realized I never talk with headphones. Am I screaming?
No. Your sound is okay.
It sounds okay? Okay.
You don't need to worry about that because StreamYard modulates the sound.
Okay, so the volume isn't too loud, but does it sound like the tonality of a person who is like you know what I mean? Does it sound like you're being yelled at?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
You are coming off as someone who is passionate about the material. Just that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. I'm hearing myself in the phones and I'm thinking, I feel like I'm yelling. All right, fine. Thank you. Good. Good to check. Okay. But the mythopoetic, all right, what were we thinking? Thank you for letting me know I'm not yelling at you because I hate to be doing that. The mythopoetic expert advances knowledge of the universe under a system of rules which play themselves out on the national or on the global stage, and usually over many hundreds and thousands of years. The stories which are properly edited and constructed in this worldview are the ones that preserve and propagate, and also are the ones. Okay, so this is another way. Not only are they asking in real time for the gods to speak through them, but as we said before, the stories are being edited over millennia by being passed down, not changing. If the society orienting itself around the story hasn't changed, then the story hasn't changed. If the story does change, then that means the society changed in some way and needed to revise their story. But it happens most of these societies are tens of thousands of years without changing. But they're being revised because only what's memorable is being remembered and passed on. So we talked about all that already. But none of that is internalized in the mind of the single storyteller, right? He's just doing a good job of telling the story as it was told to him when he was an artist who had the ability to sort of see it more than we did. All right.
And what was memorable resonated with the peoples.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So what does it mean to be memorable? It means you don't forget it. Okay. Well, what does it mean to not forget it? It means while you're striving to survive and orient yourself in the world properly, that keeps popping up unbidden in your mind, right? It just keeps, it's like I keep remembering the story of Cain, and I keep seeing how much I'm struggling and how my bitterness is making things worse. And the story just keeps popping up. It's like, well, it's memorable. It's not that you're choosing to remember it or even trying to remember it. It's about you. And so it's popping up in your mind. And, that's what we mean by oriented around it. So, yeah, that's exactly like you said. That's what we mean by resonating, or that's one of the things we mean by resonating. All right, the stories which are not illuminating towards meaning or perhaps towards truth are lost, or they don't emerge, or if it's not a good enough truth, it's the central story of a culture that doesn't survive, or a person who comes to a bad end. All right. So this is another mythopoetic. How things seem to us is how they are, right? My subjective experience of the world is what the world is. Or at least how things seem to us is how they are to us, either way. And how they are to us is what we care about, okay? So, like you said in the last lecture, a very skilled scientific tracker in the bush with a lot of technology for how to track, he can think in objective empirical ways. He has those tools, obviously. He's very good at it. He also has the ability to say, I'm not going on this hunt, which holds the lives of myself and probably my tribe in the balance, without seeing the shaman and getting a blessing first. I better be oriented in a humble way, in a proper attitude, because it's not just my knowledge that matters. It's my humility towards nature, my duty towards my family and my culture. All of that has to be in line, or my knowledge isn't enough, right? It's like, one of the stories about Narcissus, right? We talked about Narcissus. One of the stories about Narcissus is that he went on hunts with others, but he wasn't interested in them being good at hunting. He was interested in bragging that he did the best. He wasn't interested in getting a lot of good to distribute. He didn't have an aim towards anything except me. Let me prove that I'm the best in the room all the time, right? So that doesn't make a good hunter, and it doesn't make a good leader of the hunt, and it doesn't make a good, right? There's better ways of being than that, but the answers to that are not scientific. So this shaman, the Bushman tracker has to have all of that in line, and he's wise enough to know it, and he has to have the scientific knowledge as well. So what we're saying is, go ahead.
Maybe what we could kind of paraphrase what you just said is, we need to be suspicious of developing what would be the equivalent of abscesses on our personality, which is equated with egocentrism and narcissism, and instead we must pay reverence to our ancestors, to the part of our culture that consists in our legacy, that is a wealthy legacy indeed of the culture that we are fortunate that survive to our days and can keep things running, maybe for millennia, especially if it is looked at reverently, updated, etc. We can keep going on for millennia, and all that hangs in the balance is stop being so self-centered, and look at the biggest picture.
Well, everything hangs in the balance. It's the myth that you sent me in that video of the spirit of seeing, right? The monster's coming, the flood is coming, the culture's going to die, everything's going to come to nothing unless, as you say, this is one of the Jungian keys. We look at, unless with reverence we come and pay attention to the ancestral wisdom, the ancient mythopoetic truths, unless we try to understand them, have them resonate with us, figure out ourselves, get ourselves oriented properly, do the things Socrates was using philosophy to trick people into doing, do it philosophically, do it, I mean, mostly what we are is mythopoetic, so we pretty much can't ignore this. But yeah, it's everything hangs in the balance, right? What do we have to lose? Like you said, we have some selfishness, some insecurity, motivated, egocentric nonsense. We have parts of us that are very precious to us that are going to have to die. And the stories will use violence to depict how certain things have to die. And you have to murder those things because they're not worthy of the future that you're aiming at. So what were these mythopoetics talking about? They were talking about everything we have to pay attention to, and what they cared about was how the world was like to us, because that's what it's like to be. And what does that mean? It means reverence for your ancestors, reverence for the ancient wisdom, reverence for your community, which means your family, your broader community, the people in the present now. You have no reverence for any of those things unless you have a vision for a future that's in another place, right? We could be doing better. We could be thriving more. I want to have descendants. I want the future to be better than it is now, right? So it's like reverence for the future, reverence for the past, an awareness, a humble awareness of your duty to the people around you. Then there's nature that's trying to kill you. You might as well have some fucking reverence for that, right? So how am I interacting with that? Well, mythopoetically, I'm interacting with it as if it's a bigger person I have to deal with. That's what we mean by they see they're not imposing personality on it. They say what it's like to be me is to relate to things. So I'm relating to things. And, the wind is making me angry. The clouds are giving me an omen, right? Like that, you live that way. We all live that way. We also can talk about droplets of water and other things like that, but it's idiotic. I mean, it's not helpful from a mythopoetic perspective. They wouldn't be incapable of thinking that way. They just understood that that's not as immediately important as getting this me oriented to the cosmos, to nature, to people, to the past people, to the future people, and to the divine, whatever the divine is, which seems to emerge from those larger personalities that are in the rest of nature, right? Nature we think of nature as the material stuff that we're in, but as you pointed out earlier, we're a part of nature. The mythopoetics are seeing it that way. They're saying nature is everything that's not me, and I'm also a part of it. Right? There's no difference between learning something about how to garden and learning something about myself. I'm relating to the plants. I'm relating to the earth. I need to be respectful and humble and have my eyes open and my ears open and hear what it's saying to me, and have the kind of personality that relates to it with patience and says, I have a vision to plan. Let's keep some seeds and not eat them for next year. Let's pay attention to what's happening. The ground is unhappy because I keep planting the same thing, right? So it's all of it is, we're almost saying, let's take away the scientific tool. Let's take away the philosophical tool and say, just for a moment, the mythopoetic can see everything that way. And it's possible that way of seeing things is at the base of everything and makes possible philosophy and science, that those might be nestled within them or built on top of them or something. But for this class, we're going to try as best we can to just get into this realm where that's the only way we're thinking. Fair enough?
Fair enough. I would just like to give you two examples of guys that came from the more scientific and also a bit philosophical realms, and they tried to reinvent myths or update myths. So I'm thinking about Isaac Asimov, who created, for instance, the Foundation after he clearly studied the ancient Greeks, Romans, the Abrahamic tradition, because he published the two more technically oriented books on the history of the Greeks and a guide to the Bible, the Old and New Testament. I can only imagine what the guy went through to be able to, with some confidence, publish these books when he comes from engineering and science. So he probably had invested a lot of free time on these. And then he created his foundation, where you can see religions created there that are clearly inspired by polytheism, Abrahamic traditions, etc. So he didn't just haphazardly make them up. He wanted to make them with the potential to resonate with people. And the other guy is
Yeah.
Carl Sagan, who also wrote quite mythopoetically in his Cosmos, and also when he wrote Contact. So basically, the contact with the sublime, another
Okay.
culture, much more advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there can be a back and forth, I think.
Yeah, I have two questions for you. Yes, yes, there can be. And when I say that philosophy and science are nestled within them, I mean that those are the roots that are giving them an aim and a vision and maybe making it possible for them to do it. And they can also, like we said, you can extract propositions from the myth stories, but then you've got to go to the philosophers to sort out if those are reasonable and stuff, right? So there's definitely a dialectic. There's a back and forth between these. Absolutely. I got two questions for you. One, we talked in the pre-show about this, and we've been talking about it a little bit. I'm making a presumption. See, tell me if I'm right. My presumption is that the reason why you're so interested in this question of updating the mythological stories for the present day is that there's something in you that resonates with the artist. I don't know. Are you working on art? Are you like? Is that why this question keeps coming up for you?
I'm writing on a daily basis, even if it's just short.
Creatively.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
exactly.
Okay. That's what I was thinking. That's awesome, by the way.
It's kind of like when I read, especially mythopoetic stuff, it's like I'm a storm cloud, and
Okay,
I just need
good.
to rain something.
Okay,
Uh,
so
yeah,
oh,
and usually Twitter gets my writings, so they suffer for it. But
that's good. That's
maybe
good.
one day I can collect my writings and maybe put them together in some fashion that resonates, that makes sense. Who knows?
Fantastic. So then two things I want to say. One, never tell an artist how to be an artist. So we're talking about mythopoetry. We're talking about how they're getting in touch with the dream. We're using propositional language to try to describe what's happening here. My advice is ignore all of it and go do your fucking art, because I don't know how to be an artist, and I know that artists are like muses. They're with the muses. They're resonating. They're trying to be conduits, and I know from experience interviewing them that they don't even know how to put into words what that even means. Like, you know how to do it, so just do it and don't worry about anything we're talking about when you're doing it, because what we're talking about is stumbling in the dark, trying to put words to this whole thing. Doing it is something you can do without having the words, and the words are probably not helpful. The second thing I'm going to say to you, though, about this class that's going to make you pretty excited is you keep pointing out that there's these guys and they're studying the myths, and then they're giving us new versions. Jung's whole point was that every story anybody likes at all, they like because it's in touch with the archetypes. These are the archetypes directly talk, right? The reason you like the Matrix is that, or the reason you like Hamlet is like you like Marduk. The reason, like, the archetypes are if Hamlet is the story of an adolescent trying to struggle with doing what's right in the face of cultural and malevolent elements around him and vacillating on that, if he represents that coming of age struggle for a lot of people, well, what he represents and what a lot of other stories about a way of being a hero or a tragic hero represent, the archetype is what they are, right? So the archetype is in relationship to all the individual characters, as the individual characters resonate with a million different people. Okay, so you're seeing it with certain artists, and you're saying, "Wow, it seems like they got some truths, and then they updated them." It's like, no. What I'm saying is, no artist has ever done anything except get in touch with the mythopoetic, the archetypal realm, as Jung calls it, right? So by studying the greatest scriptural versions of that, that is, of course, and again, I want to reiterate, you don't have to consciously get in touch with it. Artists somehow are magically getting in touch with it, right? They have a dreaming capacity that is different than mine, right? They just have an ability that not everybody has. In fact, it's extremely rare. And they develop it and they work on it and they figure out, oh, I shouldn't think like this, or I should like this, or if I have coffee, it helps, or whatever the heck it is. But they don't have to know how they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it. But what they're doing from the Jungian perspective is getting in touch with the exact same realm that Moses was in touch with, that the Hindu deities were in, that the Metamorphoses is going to describe for us. So it's true of the authors you're bringing up. Jung says that's what makes art good. There's no such thing as good art that isn't that. So in other words, every good movie, if you wanted to do the silly thing we philosophers do and use propositional language to talk about it to death instead of just enjoying it, like that's what we're here to do in this class, is to talk about it to death. But I'm drawing a distinction there for the purpose of saying, doing this class doesn't make me not want to stand in front of the statue of David with my jaw hanging open for 3 hours. That's valuable in a way that this isn't. But of course, this is valuable in a unique way as well, right? So I keep drawing that distinction. But the point is, Jung's idea is that that's what makes all art good. And if it's not good art, it's because it's a bad dreamer giving us a distorted view of that. And that's why it doesn't resonate with us.
Aristotle used to say in his Poetics, art is imitation. And if it's imitating something that is sublime, then it will resonate with a lot of people, because the sublime is in contact with everyone. If you manage to figure out what is God in your mind and become divinely inspired and do a painting or a piece of poetry that sheds some light or represent that which you understood is God, then people won't even know why it resonates with them. It just will. And to give you another example, George Lucas, he clearly invented his Star Wars with the Force and everything after he clearly studied Vedic tradition. There's a lot of Vedic stuff there. All is Brahman, all is Force, and whatnot, and maybe even Taoism and such. And also, if you look at the characters Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker, you kind of see the same characters that were Seneca and Nero when Nero was a teenager. The guy was already kind of filthy, and the master did what he could, but to no avail. The character was already, that character.
Absolutely. So I'm going to send you a link. This won't be available later, so just copy it down.
Sure.
So I'm going to give the same damn disclaimer again. You don't have to think about all of this philosophically if you don't want to, but there's value in doing that, right? I just want to have proper reverence for art and artists and say, none of this matters for doing art. What you said matters: being steeped in the stories, resonating with them, dreaming well, being connected to the muse, whatever the heck it is that lets you guys do it, then do it. But if you're interested in these questions, this is a really good book on philosophy of art. And I sent you a link that will allow you to buy it for a few bucks or something on the internet. Let's see, lowest price, I guess 30-ish bucks. But in any case, that's a really good book that talks about what you were just talking about. It talks about what you're talking about. It talks about art and how it works and what it does, and you might enjoy that book.
Also, to complement on what you said, sure, there is a lot of mysteriousness when artists are coming up with whatever concept of new artistic piece they will create. But there is also some things that are more or less true and tested, that John Cleese approaches in his guide to creativity as well. And if you want to become a writer and you want to write epic stuff or sci-fi or whatnot, you better know science for the sci-fi, some science, so that the
Sure,
sci-fi,
sure.
so that the sci-fi isn't implausible and people won't just roll their eyes. But you also want to have characters there that resonate with people, because if not, they will just be one-dimensional characters that no one cares about, and they will be cool gadgets
You know,
that could exist. But that's why it was, I think, so important for Isaac Asimov to, of course, he comes from a scientific background and he kind of can extrapolate to the future, space travel and robots and AI and whatnot. But the characters that we see in the Foundation, there's the corrupt leader that is so full of himself that he cannot see that his entire empire will just fall into crumbles, because everyone is just so full, just so fed up with him. People will start to practice terrorism, and there's this smart guy that knows that he can predict things that will happen on a broad scale, but he cannot predict things for individual people, because characters are very difficult to nail. And so, yeah, this it speaks to so much that he probably gained from studying the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, and much more. So, so yeah, this is a kind of investment that I'm doing. Firstly, for my own character self improvement,
sure.
but a
But to
secondary
be
good,
steeped, sure.
yeah, a secondary good that could come up from it would be I would have something of interest to create, basically.
They're one and the same. Knowledge of the world and knowledge of self is the same from the mythopoetic perspective. As you resonate and learn, you also become the thing that you're actualizing into, right? Maybe I could never be an artist, but if that's what's resonating, right? It's like, well, how do you become that? Well, this is one potential way. All right, here's something I thought of while you were talking. A lot of novelists describe it this way. I remember Rushdie saying once, uh, about a book he had written. He had this idea of the novel, right? He had these characters. It's one of the most beautiful novels. I'm not going to go into it because it would never end. But it's a great novel. He had these great characters, awesome novel, very beautiful. And then he said, and then the characters told me that my ending was crap and that that's not how the ending was going to happen. Right? There's a lot of novelists who say, I wait for the characters that are now alive to tell me how their story actually ends. Right? So he had this idea of how it was going to end, but like the characters, like, you can't write me that way. You're going to sit down and you're going to try to write it, and it's not going to happen. And when you figure it out, people think writer's block is some mysterious thing. No, it's your subconscious telling you this isn't right. That's all it ever is. That's all. I swear to God, that's all it ever is. Okay. I pretend like I have no connection to arts, but I've written some stuff. I swear to God, when your subconscious says no, that's where writer's block comes in, and there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. Figure out what it's actually supposed to be, and again, that's asking for inspiration, right? You figure out what it's supposed to be, and then suddenly you can produce all these amazing things. But if you're trying to make a thing, if you're trying to force it, if you haven't looked at something that needs to be looked at, you won't actually be able to write the next sentence. It's just you cut off the tap, right? That's what writer's block is. So yes, you're doing it to develop yourself. You say, well, a secondary thing might be that my path to becoming an artist in this way will be actualized. No, those are the same thing. Those are the same thing. Right? Learning about yourself is knowing about the world. Knowing about the world is knowing about yourself, at least from the mythopoetic perspective. And if they're right, those two will be the same thing. I'm pretty sure that you could take a very scientific engineer genius and you couldn't get him to produce a novel by learning the formula for how it should work. I know that some people think you can. I don't think so. I mean, look, there's great art and there's lesser art. You can probably write an AI to give you a romance novel. You're not going to write a book that people can't get out of their minds and can't ignore, that changes the world for 2,000 years. But Aristophanes could, Shakespeare could. You know what I mean? So why? Well, maybe these are some glimpses into how it's possible.
So it's worthwhile at least to listen to those guys who knows what might
Yes.
happen.
Oh, wait, to listen to who?
To listen to Aristophanes, Shakespeare, etc.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you said, you're going to be steeped in it. That's what we're here to do. We're going to talk a lot about, we're using a lot of propositional language to talk about it. But when we get into the story, we're going to use the Jungian keys to humbly try to unlock and hear properly, and then let the tsunami overwhelm us and see what it teaches us about ourselves and the world we live in. And, or, if you want, if you're in this class watching this later and you say, no, I'm going to go do that the way you say, to test the proposition if any of that's true. And maybe I'm going to conclude, no, this is nonsense, and you can take anything and try to make meaning out of it, but you're bringing the meaning to it. That's a proposition. Like, let that be the thing we're testing in this course. But my experience is it felt that way until what we cover tomorrow with the Jungian keys, which we've been covering today because you've been bringing them up instinctively or just understanding as an artist. But we're going to talk about those keys, and the meaning is overwhelming.
Let you know that I have not yet studied Carl Jung.
In the after show, we'll talk about that a little bit. I've got some things to say about studying Carl Jung. We'll have a fun conversation when this is over. Let me just see if any of these other points about mythopoetic thinking are worth mentioning here. Oh, yeah. All right. I think it's getting late, but these have to be covered. So why don't we pick up next time right here? Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I'll keep going. I just feel like I'm going to try everybody's patience if we just keep talking like this forever.
Yeah.
So good. I'm going to say pick up here, pick up here. These are things that definitely have to be covered. Okay, so once again, before we go to the post show and have a quick talk, to wrap up, we've covered about half of what we want to cover in our propositional descriptions of understanding the mythopoetic way of thinking as opposed to other ways. We've been talking about this for a long time. We're not going to go into it all again right now, but when we start again tomorrow, we're going to pick up with some other insights into how it is that Abraham is thinking about the world when he's writing a story, or Moses, or Homer, or or Ovid, right? How are they thinking about the world, and how are the people listening to their story conceptualizing themselves and the world in order to get the meaning out of the story and in order to write it the way they did? And then when we're done with that tomorrow, we'll get into the Jungian keys, which we've already unavoidably touched on a few of them, which are about unlocking our own personal ears to approach the story in a way that unlocks the meaning. And that will all be the very, very long preface to the meat of the course, which is we're going to start reading the Metamorphoses, and we're going to look at a lot of art, and we're going to see if there's any meaning. And who knows, maybe we'll get through 2 stories and say, I don't see any meaning here, let's just drop it. But I have a feeling what we're going to do is, hopefully, if we do it properly, and if these keys are correct, and if we've understood anything correctly and how to approach it, or maybe if somebody listening is just instinctively thinks this way, or is an artist and has those instincts, we're going to unlock a ton of meaning. I think it's going to be really worthwhile. So that ends the synopsis of what we're doing and what we're going to be doing. I'm going to end the broadcast, and we'll talk a little bit, if you don't mind hanging out for about 10 minutes. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right.